working and connected like-minded organisations who want a better future for animals. Our movement to help animals is stronger when we are united and working together. Resources are often scarce in our field, so through collaborations, we can be more efficient and more impactful in our efforts to help animals. Asia for Animals now also has 8 member-led working groups that bring our members together to collaborate in particular areas of animal advocacy, such as social media animal cruelty, farm animal welfare, issues affecting dogs and cats, helping organisations understand policy and advocacy, finding solutions to human and macaque interactions, and ethical elephant tourism. And soon we will launch a working group dedicated to enhancing the existing wealth of skills and capacity in animal protection organisations across Asia. And of course, we have recently developed the Sanctuaries and Rescue Centers Coalition. For the past year, SARCC has been developing a working group with the aim to support sanctuaries and rescue centres fulfil their missions in helping wildlife, from sharing resources and experience, hosting events such as this one today, and providing a platform to connect and network. We endeavour to help SARCs not only on issues of animal welfare, but any challenge they need assistance with in order to achieve their missions. Over the last 6 months, we have had dozens of conversations with sanctuaries, rescue centres, and the organisations supporting them. We have learned an incredible amount about their challenges and their needs in order to achieve their missions. We also saw that these challenges are often shared across regions, species, and organisations. But we have also learned about their dedicated and tireless efforts to help individual animals and in species conservation. SARCs do not only encounter issues in welfare and conservation, but are multifaceted organisations that have concerns beyond just animals in their care. SARCs face pressures from government partners, the need to meet international guidelines, organisational and financial sustainability, and in the development of education and conservation programs to change the hearts and minds of people. SARCs have multiple pressure points in helping wildlife, and often all within a strained, resource-limited environment. Very often, SARCs placed at this frontline pressure point between alleviating suffering of individuals rescued from the wildlife trade and also being guided with exceptionally threatened species. And with limited resources, how do they manage trade-offs and make decisions at this front line? Our event today, Sanctuaries and Rescue Centers, on the front lines of conservation and welfare, we will explore some of the most pressing issues that were raised by sanctuaries and rescue centers across Asia. I want to welcome and extend my thanks to our 4 dedicated speakers who have each had many years of experience in Asia on those very front lines. We hope this event will act as a catalyst, both to demonstrate what tools and programs are available to support SARCs in their challenges and to start conversations on difficult topics. Each of our speakers will have around 25 minutes to present, followed by a short Q&A session of about 10 minutes. Please post your questions and comments for our speakers in the chat box via Zoom or on YouTube, and our event moderators will filter questions. To save time here, we will ask them on your behalf. Some of your questions to individual speakers may be reserved for the discussion at the end if we think it would be a great discussion topic. At the end of our event, we'll have a longer 40-minute panel discussion where you'll be able to comment and ask questions to our panel of speakers. We ask that you also place discussion topics in the chat box at any time during this event, but especially in the final break time. And if your question is selected, we will ask you to unmute and turn on your camera to ask your question, but only in the discussion at the end. If you are selected to ask a question, please remember to speak clearly for those people where English is not their first language. And please remember, no question or comment is a stupid question or comment. We are here to learn and engage. You may also use Zoom direct message function to myself or an Animals for Asia staff member, as you can see on the right there, to ask a question anonymously. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Erhamna Putri is a conservation program supervisor at Wildlife Rescue Center Jogja on the island of Java in Indonesia. She has led several conservation and research projects with WRC Jogja, such as the genetics of binturong within Indonesia and a Malayan giant turtle ex situ conservation project. Very excitingly, she has a deep interest towards sustainable and resilient conservation institutions, especially wildlife rescue centers and rehabilitation centers. Dr. Erhamna's talk today will revolve around conservation and welfare challenges faced by a multi-taxon wildlife rescue center and ways to overcome these challenges. Dr. Erhamna, thank you very much for joining us. If you would like to please share your screen You can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Elliot, for the introduction, and just for make it easier, just call me Ina. That's fine. Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
I can see your screen.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode yet, but I can see your screen.
Okay. Yeah, I think for better communication and network, I will just turn off my video if that's okay.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, nice to meet you all again. I looked at the names, some of you I might be familiar of, so welcome again, and it's great to see you. And for those this is the first time meeting me, yeah, I hope we can continue to know and be friends in the future. Okay, first of all, I thank for the SARCC and Elliot especially for inviting me to join and present in this event. So today, without further ado, I will just present my presentation, sharing my experience about the Sanctuary and Rescue Center issues, and in more like the organizational perspective. So yeah, to begin with, maybe this is just an outline for my presentation. We might start with what is the wildlife rescue and why we should rescuing wildlife, and also in the category of rescued animals, and also the practical action or steps in wildlife rescue. And then several considerations for rehabilitating wildlife, and also finally challenges faced in overall wildlife rescue, and also with the conclusion. So to begin with, what is actually in the wildlife rescue? Rescue itself is the effort made to ensure the survival of the wildlife and their population through either rehabilitation, release, and or the euthanasia. And also the rehabilitation is actually part of the rescue itself, with the definition of treating and providing the temporary care of the injured, diseased, displaced indigenous animals, and the subsequent release of those healthy animals to the appropriate habitat in the wild. And release itself, as we all know, it's just sending or returning the rescued animals to the appropriate habitat. And euthanasia itself is actually in the act of ending the animal's life with the purpose to relieve the suffering. So back again, the goal of wildlife rehab as part of the wildlife rescue is for a successful return to the wild with the likelihood of the rehabilitated animals to live for the long term or to survive. So this is just a thought about why people like to rescue in the wildlife. First of all is because of the animal welfare concern. And there's also some kind of a feeling about offsetting the impact of us human on species demographic, which is, as we all know, that the species decline generally caused by the anthropogenic actions and factors. So it's like moral and ethical responsibility for us to rescue the wildlife. And also some people might rescue wildlife to control the potential disease outbreak. And also sometimes it also happens where there is a public demand to rescue the wildlife. And also interesting thing is wildlife makes us feel good. And another thing why we do rescue is because of the law enforcement. This is very happening in Asian countries because of the legislation consideration. So considering generally the wild animals, they are the law protected being. And also the reason why rescuing is obviously for the conservation. There is the need to preserve and conserve the species due to the declining population. So when it comes to rescuing wildlife, usually what kind of wildlife you rescued is those that are first injured, sick, orphaned, or stranded, and then confiscated through the law enforcement effort in the context of the illegal wildlife trade and also the illegal ownership, and also sometimes as a result of the wildlife conflict, human wildlife conflict. So this is just the practical actions of how usually the work in the rescue center. So start from the animals coming to the site, and then stabilization of the animals itself, making sure that they're doing okay. And also after that, we proceed to the quarantine period, quarantine step, and then after finishing the quarantine, then there will be a rehabilitation usually, and after rehab, there will be time when we need to assess on their future, or it's usually called as the assessment of the disposal. Usually the disposal will include release or euthanasia, or either put the animals again for the long-term captivity or to the sanctuary. The actors involved in this action of rescuing wildlife are usually the managers of the rescue center itself, and also the veterinarians, animal keepers, biologists too sometimes, and also obviously in the authority. And this is just the example of in more detail what's been done when we rescue the wildlife. So when the animals first came, obviously it called with intake. We need to know about the history of the animal itself and also how they look like. It's called the presentation. And based on the history and the presentation, we would just do the brief initial assessment on how to categorize them. Either they're stable. If they're stable, in a good condition, then we can proceed to the clinical examination or conducting the other diagnostic test. And then there it comes the quarantine period, where after quarantine, we may think either this releasable or not releasable. And then if releasable, then it will undergo the rehabilitation process. Obviously started with the treatment, if it's needed a treatment. And also when it comes to the decision that it's not non-releasable, or with the poor prognosis, I mean, in a very bad condition because there's been multiple physical problems, then there would also be the option of euthanasia. And for those that are in emergency situation, usually they need the emergency stabilization, and there it goes. After they're stable, going through the same steps again. And for those that are experiencing the emergency condition, but it's unfortunately non-treatable, there is an option to directly euthanize them. And these are just the division of the period within during the rescue of the wildlife, and the stable condition or stabilization until performing clinical exams is usually called as the rest period. So we just give the time for the animal to rest, and then the rest would call the quarantine period. So there are some consideration for rehabilitation as well after going through some series of rescuing and saving stabilization of the wildlife. The first is the legal aspect. We must consider how's their conservation status or their protection status, and also the ethical, and obviously the welfare. Usually it's more for individual animals, and then the conservation significance of the animals, usually taking more, more view or broader view towards how it impacts the population in the wild generally, and also in the health and safety, the resource availability to do the next rehabilitation for the animals. And then here it goes about the challenge issues faced in overall process of rescuing wildlife. The very first challenge is, of course, the animal welfare concern. The most prevalent issue in rescue center is spatial constraints. It includes the size of the space, and then when there is a space, we need to deal with the complex social arrangement for each animals, because not one individual can fit with other individuals. So there it comes a problem of the overcapacity as well sometimes. And there is also a thought about better releasing them rather than to place them in a substandard care. And also there's a difficulty as well to cater the needs for multi-species at one-time rescue. This is especially in the case where in one time we got a confiscation, which includes multiple species, the birds, the reptiles, primates, mammals, all in one time. And we need to deal with them at one time. It's obviously very challenging. And also when we're as a rescue center, we usually deal with the unexpected number and what kind of species that will become coming to our center. So that's pretty much the thing for the animal welfare issue and challenge. And also on the second thing, which is this is very vocal and very important and difficult challenge to address, is the local attitudes. So the local attitudes may affect the maintenance, the overall maintenance in the captivity itself. The local attitudes itself, it's really varied among different socioeconomic condition, cultural, religious group, and it's different in every country, I think. And the local attitudes itself can sometimes be exacerbated by the local traditions that sometimes they may identify the species as the undesirable. I mean, what's the function of having these animals here? What's the function of the trading animals, this kind of animals here? Just waste of time, waste of money and everything. Or solely, there is a community identify the wild animals as a food or the medicine resources. There's also a potential backlash views regarding how the government may allocate the funding for rescuing the animals rather than to human. This is quite focal, especially in the developing countries. And then the only way to overcome this is to do as many as public awareness. So what kind of public awareness we should do is with probably just start with ensuring the tangible benefits of saving wildlife to locals, like increasing their pride of rescuing wildlife, like telling them why we should care for this wildlife. And then by that kind of awareness, we hope that in the future we can nurture respect to nature and animals from the local. And another challenge is about the professional development. Many times we find difficulties in finding the sufficient capacity to handle the captive wildlife in the country. And this is probably where the international experts may come to help building the local capacity and the expert. And rescue center, despite many limitations in terms of the capacity and the knowledge, still they provide roles in education opportunities for other individuals needing the training in care, handling of wildlife, or other topics beyond that. And this is where the internship opportunities to build the local knowledge come. And this is where actually the moment where we should think that what we have, at the very least, it's very helpful for the better nature. This is just the example when I received knowledge from other expertise. And then also this is even with the global animal welfare with Nick here as well to do the staff capacity building regarding the animal welfare. And other challenge is the veterinary concerns on the wildlife health. The very first is we're very lacking to access any medical information and also references. This is especially the case when we work with many indigenous, unique, and local species to which there has been no reference whatsoever about this species yet. And there is also a very lacking diagnostic technology in the country, especially for those working in a very remote location. And there's also lacking access to the drugs or medicine specific for wildlife due to probably because it's just rarely used and it's not many people familiar with that. There may be an issue with the drug registration procedure, the government. So else as an alternative, we very much using the human and domestic animal medicines. And most incoming animals actually have been exposed to human and domesticated animals. This is especially for the countries like, like Indonesia. Most of the incoming animals, they come from pet animals or from the trade, which is they've been exposed by many conditions that is quite unpredictable and we don't know what they bring, and that's automatically increasing the difficulties to detect the potential disease that those individuals might be exposed to. And obviously, it will pose as a additional risk to the environment when we release the animals. And also, this is pretty much general, that lacking of knowledge about wildlife medicine and disease, not only for the wildlife veterinarian, but also for all the veterinarians and the paramedics or the animal health workers. This is this is a big boundaries that we should fill the gap. We should fill the gap with approach of the One Health. Many times we have the experience when we need to translocate or sending the animals outside from the region, and we have to pass the quarantine. And in the quarantine, they usually not really familiar with the wildlife, so it's a bit, challenging process to make them understand that these animals is quite safe to be transported to. That kind of a thing can be catalyzed using One Health, where we can give more understanding, more education to other workers related to the animal health about the wildlife disease. And also other challenge is because the rescue center built with the hope that individual animals could later help to augment the wild population in a positive way, of course. For example, through the population reinforcement or reintroduction. So we must ensure that the existing ecosystem benefiting from that. And that it comes with the release, obviously have to be done carefully to avoid overpopulation that is very harmful for the conspecific and other sympatric species in the wild and for the welfare of the animal itself. And there's a theory in one journal saying that using confiscated animals to establish free-ranging population deems better than only releasing one individual. And habitat survey itself is, as we know, is seriously a really tough work. Not to mention the post-release monitoring is another level of the tough work. So that's pretty much challenge from the ecological or the existing environment. And this is quite interesting challenge about the reality in politics or political realities. So having a strategy of making some animals as a charismatic species, or and the one with the status of confiscated wildlife, sometimes could attract the global attention, and it potentially leads to political ramifications as well. And the government agencies usually they tend to be very responsive towards the public opinion, which later drives more of a responsive act. But unfortunately, it's not always benefiting the wildlife. So, for example, this is the case in 2021, I guess, where there is a politician in Indonesia called Bu Susi. She's a very famous Ministry of Fishery. So she posted in the Twitter asking for help to rescue one of the deer. in some island in Pangandaran, that's the West Java. And because she witnessed that this animal is injured, and then it raises so much attention from netizens and also the government eventually, that they come to directly rescue these animals, although there is a conflicting arguments as well behind that. Actually, is it ethical to save this deer because they're in their habitat already, and there is a nature, selection where the less dominant individuals might fight with the alpha male individuals? So there's a question on whether is it ethical to intervene at this moment. So in this case is to show that usually the agencies really doing the responsive act that is still need to be really considered, whether is it really can protect the wildlife at the end. And also there's the international pressure or the political agenda that may pose more pressure towards the authorities to force the release of unfit and, in worst case, the behaviorally impaired individuals in the wild. And also there's a pressure, the political pressure as well sometimes, that release of animals and release of the unsuitable animals, and also captivity of the animals that are unreleasable. So because of that political pressure. And it is also found that sometimes the nationalistic attitudes could also prevent sending the non-releasable animals to the better facility outside the country. So the way to overcome this, obviously through the prudent diplomacy, we need to be really really objective, using the professional approach to be able to inform the government or the authorities who's making the final decision. And also the financial challenge is one of a kind. We also know that limited financial resource is the main challenge for most of the rescue centers. This is just for the illustration that the cost for doing the proper medical checkup and food for one orangutan during the quarantine period, approximately 1,000 USD. So it's sometimes raising questions. With that money, how much habitat could be protected? So there's also some of headache as well. And also the way to overcome that is obviously to make sure that the potential donors or funders must be educated about the value of rescuing and saving wildlife through rehabilitation and release, with highlighting the impact from the conservation education and also the animal welfare perspective. And here is where the rescue center can be used as an initial tool to acquire funding for program with greater conservation impact for the wild population. So to recap all the challenges, we see that there is the sanctuary and rescue centers, which is more the welfare-based approach, and also the conservation, it's more like a biological or environmental approach. Sometimes it cannot be denied that there's a potential conflict between saving individuals with a welfare concern or with a context to conservation. So this is the example of this conflicting argument or things between those two are the introduction of the animals to the overpopulated area, and also the threat of disease carried by rehabilitated animals to the native wild population. But it is still not impossible to coexist. Still, those two are still becoming can still work together through ways such as in situ and ex situ link. We now know that there is a one-point approach, so some kind of approach to acknowledge that ex situ and ex situ is one set. and also through the preventive medicine efforts, and also through the proper population and habitat survey. So the take-home message from this, given the various and tremendous challenges as an organization working in this kind of field, it is better to acknowledge that we cannot work alone. And also we should lead up the collaborative spirit, and we need to have a list of references or experts in various relevant aspects. And we should acknowledge that what we have and know is already really precious. So the knowledge should be retained in a very neat way. And make everyone in the organization feel included, because we never know that one individual could do a double or triple work because of that multifaceted challenges faced in the rescue center. And also another take-home message is that as an individual working in a sanctuary and animal rescue center, need to be first becoming the compassionate person, or at least be more empathetic towards everything, because we do work with the living beings, with the animals. They cannot speak, and yeah, and that's why we need to understand them better. And when it comes to empathy, is really a strong point here. And also be creative, because of many challenge ahead of us, and also becoming passionate and enthusiastic in doing any kind of the work, and be open-minded, always seek for the opportunity, the positive opportunity to grow, and also be culturally sensitive towards others, because again, we deal a lot with the attitudes here. And also relax, you will never work alone. That's because you did something amazing. So that's all. Thank you very much. I think any questions?
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was, I especially liked your take-home messages at the end. But you provided an amazing overview to the rescue process and the challenges of welfare and conservation along every step of the way, and the importance of understanding people's attitudes and donors' attitudes and governmental attitudes. What was really good is you also identified where knowledge gaps exist, and that means there's opportunities to start solving them. And as you said, collaboratively. We do have a couple questions already for you. If you are ready, our first question was, what are the minimal actions you consider before you release an animal? And are there examples of releasing animals simply as there is no capacity to hold them?
Should I just answer it directly, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Answer however you like.
Okay, sorry, can you please repeat that again?
Sorry, yeah, I'll go slower.
Yeah.
What are the minimal actions you consider before you release an animal? And are there examples of releasing animals simply as there is no capacity to hold them?
Okay. This is an interesting question, because yeah, actually rescue is the work of everyone. So my suggestion would be to, when you find some animals and you don't have the capacity whatsoever regarding the animals, just ask the expert, do Googling, and see what's in your surrounding. I mean, yeah, I realized that not the organization like the rescue center is not available in any county or any province or any place, but the least you can do is to contact the expert, telling that you found this animals with such of a condition. Then that organization or expert may lead you to further direction on what's next, because releasing animals is, again, probably Prof. Anani Karis will present it later, how damaging or how tremendous it is to do the random release of the animals. So that would be my suggestion.
Well, and as a follow-up question, we also had someone ask about, can you talk about how you would determine whether an animal is releasable or not?
Okay, so for the first criteria is from the physical health. You make sure the animals is healthy clinically. I mean, from the physical appearance and also internally through the series of diagnostic, tests about the animals to make sure that they're free from any potential disease that can harm the nature or ecosystem. And also secondly is look from the behavior. Because the behavior will allow the animals to be able to survive, to socialize, and to adapt with the wild situation. And also the third one would be is there a place to release or to provide the better condition of the animals itself? Just those three important points.
Right, we just had one more question come in from Sarah Van Herpt at Animals Asia. And she asked, actually on your second point, she asked it as you were answering it. Do you actually have developed criteria or behavioral criteria an animal must meet before? And given the challenge that so many species come into wildlife rescue centers, how do you have criteria and understand the behavior of so many different species?
Yeah, that's a persistent challenge, I would say, because we never know what kind of animals that will come to our side. But we already have the system to score the behavior of the raptor species, and also for some of the primate species. But for the other thing, we would just usually consult to another rescue center who has the experience in releasing and make a score or deciding in what stage this kind of animals could be released. That's what we usually do. But the basic parameter would be they are afraid of human, and they can show pretty much their natural behavior. Like, for example, primates, they can climb, birds, they can fly, they can perch, they can prey, and that kind of thing.
Very cool. And we just want to ask one last question before we let you get away. How often in your sanctuary or rescue center do you feel you need to make compromises to your activities due to a lack of resources that may impact conservation or welfare? Such as, you want to improve your facilities to hold more animals because more animals are being rescued, yet they may impact on the programs you want to release. And if appropriate, do you have any examples where you've had to make a compromise?
Well, this is a very interesting situation for us as well, because rescue center is basically for the temporary stay. But in the end, there's a case where there are so many unreleasable animals and they have nowhere ready yet to go. I mean, the habitat is not ready yet for them to release. And then that's where we compromise. Well, actually, that's quite a lot, but we have a basic here, like for each type of animals, for example, like the reptiles, for example, the snakes, we would just provide a place where they can stretch their full body. That's the minimum. And also, for example, the birds, they can still perch, walk, fly quite freely. And also, the first thing we would just do is when we think we're not capable of taking care of these animals, we would just better recommend the government to send them to other place, or probably in our site for only the quarantine. Then we would just, during that quarantine period, we would just seek recommendation or seeking place, a better place for them to be in. Then after quarantine, after making sure that they're clear enough, we just sending them to the better place.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point there in that many rescue centers end up being overwhelmed or at capacity with animals that can't be released. And so you're making compromise between taking new animals, developing other programs, and how do we actually start to move animals either into a sanctuary situation so it frees up, as you said, temporary holding for rescues, etc. Which is actually something that Inga is going to talk on in a little while. But that's it for all our questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was very thought-provoking, and we've got a lot of points we can follow up there and knowledge gaps that we can fill.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope you like it.
We loved it. So next we have our next speaker. Let me get her bio up. Excuse me. So Sarah Bonza-Blake, you're up next. Sarah has spent over a decade in animal management, having worked in zoos and sanctuaries across the world. Sarah's role in wild welfare encompasses many different aspects, such as the creation of translation of animal welfare resources, helping to host training workshops with global project partners, and driving forward improvements for captive wild animals wherever possible. She loves working directly with animal care staff, recognizing that collaborations is key and big changes begin with baby steps. One of the biggest challenges we heard when we were talking to SARCs is opportunities for professional development at all levels of staff. Often capacity enhancement is just aimed at upper or middle management. So Sarah's presentation will explore accessible learning options and opportunities and resources available from wild welfare, and highlight the importance of continual professional development for people who work with animals and understand the impact that care and welfare has on an animal's experience in their daily lives. Sarah, whenever you're ready, please share your screen and begin.
Hey, everyone. Okay, well, hi guys. Thanks so much to SARCC for inviting me to speak today. I'm Sarah. I'm part of Team Wild Welfare, and today I wanted to talk to you all about some of the learning opportunities that we have for animal care staff, and the ways in which these resources can be used to drive forward animal welfare improvements. So firstly, a little bit about wild welfare, who we are and what we do. Our vision is a world where every captive wild animal is able to thrive and live a good life. And we achieve that in a number of different ways. We work to provide practical support to facilities around the world. We currently are active in over 10 different countries. And we work with any facility that houses animals, essentially, so zoos, aquariums, sanctuaries and rescue centres. And we work to bring welfare to the forefront of all decisions made. And that is a really important aspect to what we do, because if everybody working with animals is able to view their decisions, their management decisions through this lens of welfare, and focus their decisions that way, then it can have a really positive impact on the animals under human care. We work to build positive and constructive relationships. We very much know that collaboration is key and that condemnation isn't going to get anybody anywhere. So we are very much building positive relationships which benefit both parties, and we're really working towards keeping those relationships going long term as well. We do sometimes find ourselves returning back to the same facilities year on year, and we do have very long-term relationships that way. We do work on a significant range of resources, which I will talk you through in a minute. And we do work towards long-term sustainable change. And that is another really important aspect of what we do. Sure, we can head out to a facility, we can help with some might be, enrichment provision or enclosure changes and things like that. But what we really want to do is make sure that the changes that we are creating are in the staff themselves, and those changes can continue long after we have left that facility or that country. We do provide workshops and training, both theoretical and practical, both virtually and in country. So that is a whistle-stop tour of wild welfare. So I was really interested to see the SARC's visual representation of the identified issues which sanctuaries and rescue centres commonly encounter. And a lot of what was highlighted here is actually what we at Wild Welfare have found within our work as well. And what made me really happy is that many of our resources and current project actions are actually directly impacting these challenges to provide what we can now see as definitely very much needed solutions. So barriers to learning about animal welfare exist in a variety of sadly rather frustrating ways. So animal welfare as a science is relatively young. I always say it's only about as old as I am. So it is constantly evolving and changing. And what we thought that we knew 5 or 10 years ago might now actually be very different to what we know now, and it can be difficult to keep up. And actually, an example of that I always talk about is what I was taught about at university. For example, I was taught about the 5 freedoms, whereas now we have the 5 domains, which is much more significant. But I wasn't aware of that until after I left university. So because animal welfare as a science is a scientific subject, the concepts behind it can sometimes be presented in quite an intimidating way in lots of scientific papers and things like that. So it can be a bit difficult to apply these concepts to our daily management routines for the animals under our care. And that can be a real barrier. And then a lot of that information that is available, there is lots of information out there, but most of it is available in English, which is another limiting factor for those who don't speak it. And then as well as that, you've got the issue of information only being accessible behind a membership barrier wall or another cost associated with trying to access the information. So all of these barriers limit who can access animal welfare information, and that can potentially have a negative impact on animals under human care. So what we know as animal care staff impacts the care and welfare that our animals experience in their daily lives at a sanctuary or a rescue centre. And the way that we can continually improve care standards and management practices lies in the knowledge and confidence of animal care teams themselves. But as we heard earlier, one of the issues is that long-held beliefs in how primary care management should be conducted often dictates how animals are cared for. And these can be based on all sorts of things. It could be historical values. So I've certainly heard the phrase, "we've always done it this way." And some of you guys might have heard that as well. And that can be a real problem. It can also be based on cultural perceptions or even ego of some people. So all of these things can have an impact, and we should instead be really highlighting the scientific evidence behind them rather than any of the other aspects. So, for example, this notion that cleanliness equates to a high standard of welfare, but actually it results in sterile captive environments. So the more that we can improve accessibility to resources, the more that we can ensure that we base our care practices on science. And then understanding the differences between care and welfare is another really vital aspect for us to be able to objectively drive forward animal welfare improvements through our husbandry and management. And this is something that I struggled with a little bit, because when I was working with animals, I always assumed that just because my animals were well cared for in terms of they were clean and they were fed and they were acting relatively normally, that they experienced good welfare. But actually learning about the differences between care and welfare really helped me to understand how that might not necessarily be the case. So best practice animal care is about ensuring that animals are thriving rather than just surviving. And the more that we know and understand about animal welfare as a science, the more that we can achieve that. But how do we do that without accessible resources? Well, this is where wild welfare comes in. So all of our resources are completely free to access, and we are adding to our resource library all the time. So the first resource that I'm going to talk to you about is our Care for Us guides. And these offer advice on animal care in captivity based on individual species, behavioural and physical needs. We are continually adding to this library all the time. So if you do have a specific species that you want to know more about, or indeed species information in a specific language, then do let us know. And if anybody would like to help us with language translations, then we do always appreciate that as well. But you can see that we do currently have our guides in a variety of different languages, and we do have upwards of 35 species represented at the moment. So if you do want to access our Care for Us library, then do feel free to use the QR code on the screen right now, or just head to the resources section of the Wild Welfare website. So in the pictures, you can see the format which the guides themselves take. So firstly, we've got a brief introduction to the species itself. And then we go through specific behavioural needs of the animals or aspects of care which are discussed. And then we also highlight ways in which these can be provided for in a captive setting. So those are our Care for Us guides in a nutshell. So next up, we've got our enrichment page on our website, everyone's favourite topic of enrichment. So we do have this dedicated page full of ideas for you to try out. We've got lots of photographic examples of different enrichment that you can try. And the page also discusses really vital aspects of enrichment provision, such as discussing the what, the when, and the why. So we always I'm sure most of us are really passionate about enrichment. It's one of my favourite things to talk about, but we do need to have this deeper understanding of is it impacting the animal in a really positive way. We do also within this enrichment page have a bear specific portfolio on the page. So if you do work with bears and you want a few more ideas, then that might be a great starting place for you. So to access that enrichment page, we do have the QR code there. And as well as all the information on that page, we do also have our enrichment roadmap. And this was created in conjunction with the team at Wild Enrichment. And we currently have it in 11 different languages, including Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, Hindi, Bahasa Indonesia, Khmer, Lao, and Thai. And it's designed to talk you through the entire process of creating effective enrichment, from picking a behavioural goal through to building a device and assessing its impact on the intended animal. And assessing that impact is a really important aspect because certainly when I was looking after animals and having fun creating enrichment, I again had this assumption that just because the animal is interacting with that enrichment device, it's a success. But actually we need to be going deeper into assessing whether it has a positive impact or not. The picture on the right hand side there also shows how excited I get when we print off the enrichment roadmap during fieldwork in our project countries. And I do know that this enrichment roadmap is now taped up in quite a few back of house animal areas to inspire keepers as well, which is very exciting. And then we do have our most comprehensive resource of all. So for those of you who haven't come across our programme before, here's a brief introduction to the Wild About Welfare Digital Education Programme. And again, you can access it through that QR code. So we officially launched this programme at the start of 2021, and it was created in conjunction with the Jean Machig International Centre for Animal Welfare Education and the University of Edinburgh. And it's a programme to talk through all the essential elements of care and welfare for captive animals. And we made it to educate and empower animal care staff. And this empowerment is a really important aspect because we talked earlier about the importance of animal care teams, not just having the knowledge, but also the confidence to use that knowledge and the confidence in their own abilities. And we wanted to give animal care staff the tools that they need to better understand the welfare needs of their animals under their care and how the care that they provide is linked to the welfare that their animals experience. So the programme consists of 8 different modules, and you can see them all listed here. So each module has 2 complementary aspects. So firstly, you've got the learning content, and then you do have a set of interactive quizzes at the end of each module, and that will help you to test what's been learned, but also give you further examples. So for example, we couldn't really use video in the learning content, but there is the opportunity to use it in the interactive quizzes. We do also have an introductory document to the programme, and that just helps familiarise users with how the whole programme works and what it looks like. And then we do also have a glossary for definitions of terms which sometimes might be a bit difficult to understand. So that is how the programme looks as a whole. And within the learning content, everything is broken up into these manageable chunks of information. And we do also have scenario-based activities and reflective quick questions throughout. And this just encourages the application of the learning to your daily routines working with the animals, and also just a bit of a chance to have a little bit of a breather and just have a bit of a reflection on what you've just learned. And you can go through this completely at your own pace as well. So you can just dip in and out, or if you do want a very full-on couple of days to go through the entire course, then you can. And also upon completion, you can also email us and be able to apply for a certificate of engagement as evidence of continued professional development. So accessibility of the programme was a massive thing that we really wanted to be able to overcome, because we identified that as a massive barrier to learning earlier. So the program is completely free to access. I do get a lot of questions about this, but there is no cost associated with the program at all. You can log on right now and make a start on it if you want. It is also available across a range of different devices. So whether you've got a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, anything like that, you should be able to use it and go through both the learning content and the interactive quizzes on those devices. And then another barrier that we talked about earlier was the issue of information only being available in English. So we did obviously launch it firstly in English, but then we have worked very hard on making sure that translations are available in a range of different languages. So at the moment, the program is also available in Japanese, in Vietnamese, and in Bahasa Indonesia. And then we do also have Thai coming soon, hopefully launching in the summer of this year. So with the program as a whole, we've seen loads of really amazing stats behind its usage. And actually, this is a slightly old slide. So we have seen it used in nearly 70 different countries now. I think we're on 69 different countries at the moment using the program. So that's really exciting to see. It's had over 16,000 downloads, and we are actually seeing it being used in over 30 different facilities, and these range from universities and colleges across the world to zoological facilities, sanctuaries and rescue centers, and then even conservation projects as well. And you can see here from the quote that we were given by Arslan that it is having this tangible impact on animal care in facilities all over the world. It isn't just increasing knowledge, but it is also encouraging this change to promote positive welfare. And you can see some of the tangible impacts there. So Arslan's been installing boulders and platforms in his lion and bear enclosures, and also creating more hiding places and visual barriers for some of his hoofstock species. And this brings us to the next part of the e-learning course as a whole. So after the success of the digital version of the course, we wanted to take it a step further. And this brought us to our in-person guided training program. And the idea is that we actually go through the course as a team together in a facility in person. And we go through it as a 5-day intensive course where we go through a module or two during the morning session, for example, and then in the afternoon, this allows us to undertake practical activities based on what we've just learned. So it's a great way to learn something and then apply it pretty much straight away. And it was a fantastic way to run through the course. So these are photos from our trial run that we did in both Laos and Vietnam at the end of last year. And in the pictures, we've got one of my colleagues running through an enclosure assessment activity, which we did after going through the enclosure module. We do also have me going through some of the interactive quizzes, and we do also have the certificate presentation at the end, and everybody was very excited to receive their certificates. So the idea behind making an event, a learning event, an in-person event out of the training materials was quite a few different ideas behind it. So we really wanted to give this opportunity for continued professional development for staff. But what we love about this is that it's got the potential for modelling behaviour. And we see this particularly when we are out in the field doing the training course. So in this example, we did train a lot of middle managers and higher level keepers with the idea that they would be able to take a lot of this knowledge back and distribute it among the rest of their teams. And that can encourage this further participation, but it can also surpass other barriers. So if not everybody in the team does have access to internet, or if indeed they're actually unable to read, then they are still able to access the information through other members of their team. But it is certainly something that we want to take into these facilities and be able to disseminate amongst the teams themselves. Now, the course itself, going through it as this guided training opportunity, is a great way to get all staff reading off the same page, essentially. It's helping to understand those basic animal welfare needs and how those relate back to all our husbandry practices and decisions. So it's getting everybody on the same page and being able to set off from that level of scientific understanding to make those decisions. And what I loved about taking people through this guided training was that there was so much sharing and discussing during the courses themselves. So it wasn't just from us, it was actually from the people taking part, and they were discussing what they knew, what they'd experienced, and being able to share that with others and people that they'd never met before as well. So it was a brilliant networking opportunity, and there was a lot of informal learning opportunities too. And it really was wonderful to see these knowledge exchanges happen between these different teams. And our ultimate aim with going through this course, and particularly guided in person, was to understand and answer the why. We know that animals benefit from enrichment, but why do they? We know that good nutrition is an important aspect of animal welfare, but why is it? How does it all link in together, and why does it all matter? And that was a really important aspect for us to be able to share within the training course. Now, we wanted to make sure that the training program isn't just a good thing for staff training, but that it is also having a tangible impact on animal welfare. And we know that gaining a good understanding of the fundamentals of animal welfare science is critical to ensure these optimal husbandry practices. And this knowledge enables users to drive forward these practical management changes. And during the training course, we had a lot of learners that were clearly inspired to make the changes to some of their care practices. And a lot of them actually wrote down lots of ideas as we were going through the content together. And these ideas might have been environmental changes, nutritional changes, or indeed providing more opportunities for specific behaviours for the species under their care. And then the final resource that we have is our core fundamentals standard. So part of what we do at Wild Welfare is we conduct audits and also auditor training for organisations. And this is upon invitation from a facility. But we use the core fundamentals standard, which we actually created and we update every year. And it's used as a benchmark to measure against. And this is a great way to highlight gaps and opportunities for welfare improvements. So this standard is based around the 5 domains of potential welfare compromise model, and it is again accessible on our website if you do want to go through it. So it is quite a comprehensive document, but it is a great way to be able to understand what to measure against and how to prioritise what welfare improvements might be needed. So some of the points that we also measure against within the standard do include staff knowledge and experience. So it is also another reminder as to the important link between staff knowledge and animal welfare. So none of the resources that we do have available would be possible without the support of all the donors listed here, as well as all our wonderful volunteers and partners who have assisted with proofreading, with translations, and all the other assorted tasks associated with shaping this resource that we do have. So a massive thank you to them. And if anyone does have any questions or suggestions or is willing to help us with any translations, then please do let me know. My contact details are right there. Thank you so much for listening. And if you do have any questions, then please do feel free to give me a shout.
Thank you very, very much for that, Sarah. As you know, I've been an admirer of wild welfare for many years. And I think you raise a really good point in that in both science and animal welfare, most things have an English bias to them. So the fact that you found a knowledge gap as an organization and have been able to start filling it in is an incredible thing. And I think wild welfare deserves a lot of thanks for that. So thank you very much for your work and thank you for your presentation. We, of course, have many questions for you. So our first one is, what is your process for identifying the species to focus on in developing the species-specific guidelines?
That's a great question. So initially, when we first started putting them together, it was based a bit more on staff knowledge. So, for example, we've got a herpetological expert that works with us. So we put a few guides together based on his knowledge of reptiles. I've worked a lot with primates and certain bird species, so we put together that. But what we wanted to do is actually make it more relevant where we could. So we were able to access some some information about the most commonly kept species. This is within zoos rather than rescue centres, but obviously if anyone does want to share what species they commonly find, then that could help us in our direction for the care guides as well. But yeah, we used this information that we had access to narrow down which species we might want to focus on because of the impact that it might have. So we know, for example, that ring-tailed lemurs, Humboldt penguins, some of these specific species are very, very commonly kept within zoos, and that can be across different regions as well. We do have regional information, so we wanted to use that to focus in on what species we look into next.
Brilliant. For a small SARC that may not have the resources to have people come in and do an audit, and some tools can be intimidating, especially when they're translated. They can be very big documents, and then, you know, where to start. Are there tools available for self-assessments for sanctuaries and rescue centers as a starting point to begin ratcheting up welfare incrementally?
That's a very good question. I'm sure that there are some out there. I'm not as aware of the specific information in specific documents. Obviously, we like to work as wild welfare. We like to work both bottom up and top down. So we do bring in information at kind of both angles. So, for example, the e-learning program is a great way to understand welfare, and that would help you to prioritize the improvements that you might want to make yourself. But in terms of audits themselves, I don't know of any simplified version. However, what we do as part of wild welfare is audit training. And again, there is a small cost associated with that. So that unfortunately isn't quite free, but it is something that we do. And we actually have a series of presentations and practical exercises to talk people through the auditing program step by step. And that can break it down to make sure that it isn't as intimidating.
Sure, it's mine, but why isn't it?
So yeah, I think it's a good point you made, especially with the e-learning program. When I certainly went through it, it certainly starts to give people the opportunity to critically think about the issues that they're coming across each day.
Absolutely.
One last question. Rescue centers can be such under-resourced, overstretched places, and it seems that as much as staff would like to take time to familiarize themselves with guidelines and welfare standards, they just don't have the time to do this. For instance, having a huge animal to keeper ratio. They wind up providing only the most basic care, yet it's incredibly important. How do you see overcoming this problem?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Obviously, resources are, again, another massive barrier because we don't have infinite funds to be able to hire more staff and that kind of thing. And that's something that we can't necessarily overcome straight away. But I think as more people realise the incredible work that rescue centres and sanctuaries are doing, then hopefully they will get behind it financially, and that might be able to impact the amount of staff. But also that critical thinking of, we do have a lot of animals, but do we actually have the capacity within our staff to take more in? Because ultimately, if we are doing that, then the welfare of all the animals currently in those places might actually diminish because of a lack of staff time. So that again might be one of those critical questions. It's a difficult one because we obviously know the need is massive, but at the same time we do need to be we do have that duty of care towards the animals already in those centres. So it's a very, very difficult one, but yeah, there's some very difficult decisions that need to be made on that one as well, and sadly no easy answer, unfortunately.
No, and I think that's something we're going to have at the panel discussion at the end to see what some of those solutions may be. And interesting that you bring up decision making, because Inge, our next speaker, is going to be speaking right on that issue. But we're going to take a quick 10-minute break now so everyone can go and make a coffee or a cup of tea or get up and stretch. And we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Sarah, again, for your presentation and the work Wild Welfare does.
Thanks so much, Elliot.
Everyone will see you in 10 minutes. Okay, everyone, if you're all starting to come back now, we'll start again in about 30 seconds. Okay, everyone, that was a nice little break. So we're going to get back into it, and I'd like to introduce our next amazing speaker. For the past 10 years, our next speaker, Inge Thielen, has worked in Indonesia as conservation manager at the One Care Foundation and as the Deputy Director of Life Sciences at Chickenanga Wildlife Centre. In her role, she was responsible for the development, implementation, and coordination of conservation programs and releases. And in this role, she was able to develop innovative programs, placing the teams at One Care and Chickenanga at the forefront of Javan leopard, wreathed hornbill, and otter conservation in Indonesia. Today, Inge will share with us a tool which she developed and applied at Chickenanga for disposal decision-making for individual animals, keeping in mind welfare and conservation opportunities, but also allows for clear and effective communication with stakeholders such as government partners. Inge, whenever you're ready, thank you, and you can share your screen.
Hi, yes, I will start now. Thank you very much for the introduction. It should be up now. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Hang on one second. We're just waiting.
Thank you very much for
Sorry, Inge, your presentation hasn't started yet.
Oh, on my screen it says screen sharing.
There we go. Now we've got it.
Ah,
and your
perfect.
sound isn't coming through too well, so maybe turn your video off as well.
Yes, is this better?
Yes, I can hear you quite well now. It was just staticky before.
Okay, so I'll get started. Yeah, like I said, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really excited to be sharing this with you all. This is something actually, the decision scoring tool is actually a big Excel file, really boring to present or to share. So I try to make it a bit more interesting and take you along the thought process of everything. So I hope it's going to come across as I hope. So let's just get started. As a project manager for the eagles, which is my soft spot eagles, so that's where it all started. But as Irna already shared, in the rescue centers, there's so many species, and I got completely stuck into the amount of opportunities to learn and the amount of things that can need to happen and that you can do as a person yourself. So I developed myself, sent abroad for 10 years, and yeah, my daily work at the moment was decision making for the animals that entered, and this is disposal. As Irna also said, life planning is a nice word for it. Disposal planning is a challenging thing to do, and from the day to day, I noticed that I actually needed something to make my thought process in the right way, because actually what you're doing is you're working with your heart, because you're thinking as a welfare person, but as a conservationist, you also have to work with your knowledge and with the background, of the species. So what I was looking for is actually a tool to keep me working to make the right decision, because decision making always is hard, and we'll come back to that later. So the use of the planning tool is actually when animals arrive in any condition, actually take it already into account. This tool is for every individual, so every individual. These are some examples of arrivals. When they arrive, sometimes you can note something straight from the start, but sometimes you need your time in the quarantine or even after to assess everything correctly. Also, what we used it for was sometimes for housing decisions. So when you have 10 leopards and you have 3 leopards that are showing the right behavior or that are closer to sample according to your tool. So use it sometimes for that. So assessing which animals take priority in certain steps of the rehabilitation. And what we also use it for is medical or behavioral changes. So when you have animals for long-term facility, which happens sadly often, the medical side can change, but also behavior. But when we saw that something was changing, we pulled back, and then we used it actually as a discussion starter to go through this animal, as in, can we still provide everything that we want? Do we need to change to make other decisions? So when we're talking about disposal life planning, we have a certain amount of options, which was also mentioned by Ega already. In the tool that I use and shared with some institutions, released by the current institution is one of them. Next one would be a conservation program at current institutions. So we're talking about species specific program. When you look at chicken hungry, you have 2 different kinds of conservation, and you also have programs with animals that you receive a lot, like the dove and leopard. That's where we includes release, but it also includes awareness, education, research, whatever. So it's more like a bigger portion. Then you have translocation for release of conservation program. I put that behind it because translocation in this particular tool is translocation to another institution. So we're going to work together with other centers, rescue centers, specialized centers, and they do release.
Hi, Inge, can I just interrupt?
They have conservation programs. Of course, you have sanctuaries.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Your connection is really, really quite difficult to understand.
Sorry.
No, not your fault at all. Just thinking of a backup plan. Do you have any other ability to connect to a different internet connection or via a phone or something?
I can try via phone. Wait, I'm
Okay.
gonna.
Very sorry. We're very into your into your presentation. It just we're missing some of the key points, I think, sadly, when it's breaking up. Everyone, if we just hold on a couple minutes, we'll let Inge try and come up with a solution.
I'm gonna change internet now, so I'll be off for a bit.
Thank you. We just want everyone to hear your amazing presentation. I've heard Inge talk about, excuse me, I've heard with Inge use this tool before and sat with her while she's using it. And it's a really effective tool. And it's a problem a lot of wildlife rescue centers have, the ability to not only make internal decisions, but to work with other stakeholders and partners to understand how to make decisions and to demonstrate why a decision might be important. So it's a really, really cool tool Inge has come up with. So we really want her to be able to talk to it. And if not possible, I'm going to ask her to re-record this and we'll put it online and send everyone a link.
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah, let's have a crack
No.
at that.
Okay, where did you lose me?
Let's start with one slide before, the bit of an overview.
Use of the planning?
Yes, this one, the use of the tool. Let's start there. Thank you,
All
Inga.
right.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Oh, thank you for, yeah, sorry for that. I'm not in Indonesia right now and I still have the problem. It's quite interesting.
No worries. Have another crack.
All right. So the use of the planning tool. Well, I need to reset now, but use it. We start using it when we have new arrivals, or and as you can see here on the photos, these are examples of new arrivals. In some cases, you can start filling in the tool already when you get the animal and you know it for 10 minutes. Sometimes you need to use the quarantine time, or even at the end of the quarantine time, to assess everything correctly to finish the whole Excel file. Sometimes we also use it for housing decisions. So this is more the management side of the center. You have, for example, 3 leopards out of 10 that are showing best behavior, that are having the best background. For example, they're only there after a short conflict. They have not been in captivity too long. So we also use it to make the right housing decisions for them. So these individuals go to the rehabilitation enclosures quicker. And then we also have the moment that there are medical or behavioral changes in the animals. So this is more for the animals that stay for a longer period, sadly, because that happens in multiple rescue centers quite a lot. So when we see a medical change, we take the tool again and we go through the whole list again and see if we need to change the decision that we made before. Behavioral changes, we do the same, although behavioral changes have often a medical reason. So that's why I put it like this. But when we see a behavioral change, we also go back to the tool and see if we need to change a bit on the decision making. So when we go to the options for each that I included in this tool, it would be released by the current institution, so released by us. A conservation program at the current institution. So at Chikananga, it was either conservation breeding program. So at Chikananga, you have songbirds and pig breeding, and around that is a whole conservation program. But what we also have the rescue center part, we received a lot of leopards, we received a lot of hornbills, and also cassowaries. We have many. So we put a whole conservation program around that. So this includes awareness, releases, research, whatever that's necessary, and that can be one big program. Then translocation, which is for, in this case, translocation to another institution. So we have institutions specialized for certain species or institutions that have more experience with certain species. So this translocation is for the release of a core conservation program at that institution. And you have, of course, sanctuary option, which is necessary. I included zoo because this cannot be forgotten. This is for each country, of course, a different discussion. And euthanasia, you cannot forget about it, is a very important life planning option when you work with rescued wildlife. When we look at the start of the whole Excel file, the whole tool, one of the most important things which is sometimes forgotten is the origin of the individuals. So when you look at Indonesia, there's a lot of different subspecies. And when you talk about the yellow-crested cockatoo here in the picture, you have around at least 7 subspecies, and each subspecies is from a different area. So before you even start thinking about disposal, you need to be very sure where this individual came from. Another species or animal group where this is a big thing and where Chikananga had a lot of challenges is turtles. Turtles are very specific to its location sometimes, and actually stop the release often because you cannot really know due to limited research and limited resources where these individuals come from. Medical review. So we need to make sure that we know that this animal, the health issues don't interfere with the survival after release. So this is quite a broad factor. I'm now summarizing it because I'm not going to go through each detail, but I hope it gives you an idea how it works. And later, if you're very interested, I'm more than happy to share it with you. No problem at all. So also the behavior review is one of the very important information things before you even start thinking about disposal. And behavioral includes predator avoidance, natural social behavior, species-specific natural behavior. The biggest challenge of this tool is that it needs to be used over a lot of different species. So it is kind of generalized in a way that you're triggered to think or to be critical about what needs to be taken into account. So, for example, this Javan hawk eagle was one of the things where the medical and behavioral review was interesting, where we got the condition score. Behaviorally, he was perfect for release, but medically, he sadly wasn't. In the photo, you can maybe see that he has one dropped wing. So he has a dislocated wing, shoulder joint. So this is all just to show you how it's all very important to know even before you start talking about disposal. Now I'll go to each disposal option separately so that you can know a bit more about variables that are included. Once again, this might differ per country a bit or per situation, but this is how I made it in. So one of the variables that we are scoring is there a release program or site available? So does Tikananga have actually a program for an eagle? Do we know any release sites where this eagle can go to, for example? And this is actually basically a scoring of 0 and 0, 0, 1. So it's very easy and a bit black and white. If you're not sure, I always make a color, which means I need to go back to that. The condition score, what I just said, to be able to release it, we need to make sure that the condition is perfect. So we can only release the animal if everything is fine. So this is very vital. Zoonosis free, something that cannot be forgotten, and this is why I included it separately. We need to make sure there are no diseases in the animal. So this is one of the variables very important for the release. Rehabilitation facilities available. So you cannot even consider releasing an animal if you don't have the appropriate rehabilitation facilities, in my opinion. So you can only start thinking about release when you have this expertise available. And this is actually everything included with the rehabilitation process, but also the release in itself, the whole method, and monitoring. So what we have here is at the end, we say 5 out of 5 is the minimum score to release. Sometimes you miss something, as in we don't have the expertise. As Iana said, you reach out to experts to make sure you can do this appropriately. Or we have a release program, but the site is not available yet. Okay, well, we can solve that by putting resources into it when available. So an example from Tikananga is the Hornbill program we received in 2000. Not too sure not anymore. Let's say 17. We received 13 hornbills. There was nothing in Indonesia for this species, so we didn't have a 5 out of 5 score, but we did see a lot of options. So we started a release program for these guys. Conservation program. So one very important thing is conservation priority. So you can't say endangered and critically endangered, but there's more to it. If there are IUCN specialist groups saying the species needs more attention, it's also a conservation priority. The state is not always binding, because sometimes you have local hornbills. Well, like the local situation is different than the global situation. Facilities available. When you start a conservation program, you need to have appropriate enclosures, everything, clinic. It needs to be top notch to be able to start a conservation program. Also, you don't start a conservation program when you just have one individual of that species. That's not very effective. So other individuals are at your institution. Once again, expertise available, very important. And another one, species strategic plan. So without a strategic plan, you cannot start a program to actually have a positive influence on the conservation status. And financial ability, sponsor interest. So conservation programs cost a lot of money. So you need to be sure that you have a long-term commitment to make sure that you can actually run the program. Another example from Tikananga is the green magpie. Here again, 6 out of 6 to start a conservation program, but here an extra note that conservation priorities, sponsor interests, and other individuals are minimum requirements. So if you're missing something, you can maybe look into solving it, but these 3 I took as minimum requirement to even look into realizing a conservation program. Translocation for release or conservation program. So is there a specialized center available? It's an easy question to ask. Often it's sadly not available, but for the species on this slide, we luckily do have that in Indonesia. Does it have a conservation contribution? I added this because in Indonesia, you also have private institutions or private breeders, as they call it, that claim to do conservation programs. I need to work out what I'm saying, but that's why I added conservation contribution. Is it part of a bigger picture instead of just localized? Very important also for us is before we consider translocation, we know that welfare will be improved. If welfare is not improved, we even don't consider it. And back to origin. I included this mainly for Indonesia because there are so many different islands, and we need to make sure that these species go to the right island for the conservation output. Here is the advice: 4 out of 4 translocation requests will be activated as soon as receiving party can receive the individual. This is something that you might see as well, that you might have a location where it needs to go, can go, but receiving party isn't ready yet. So that's why I added it like this. Sanctuary, disease and zoonosis free. Disease can be a bit, zoonosis is more important, of course. You don't want to have an animal with zoonosis risk in your sanctuary. So that's why I added like this. Zoonosis, of course, is also very important with the conservation breeding. But in this case, we took it as a variable. There is an experienced sanctuary available, something which is often not the case, but added it here. They have the minimum standard facilities, and there are no other recommendations. This is added because the recommendations, release, conservation program, or translocation are of course preferred to sanctuary. You want to have another outcome for your rescued animal. So only when those 3 options are not an option, you go to sanctuary zoo or sanctuary or zoo. Important here is that I added when sanctuary elsewhere is not available, which is often the case. It's time to start working with your network to realize long-term high-quality sanctuary, either at your place or at other places. So a good example is here also with Irna again. We talked a lot about this. They work with winterhomes. We had a lot of winterhomes. We cannot house anymore, and we have some for sanctuary, some for release. So in that case, you start talking with each other and saying, can we help each other out? Can we help you with something, and you can help us with, and that's how we work with the network. So trying to find solutions together, that's most important here. The zoo, I find this a good disposal option, but there are a lot of buts to it. You need to make sure that the welfare is preserved, and each country this is different. But we at Tikananga do have we put energy in getting a network with zoos in Indonesia, get to know the ones that we can work together with, and together again you can make improve it. So we have some zoos that we work together with, all for the benefit for the animal. So for the zoo auction, of course, you want to make sure that you have what I call a tame individual, not scared by people. What you have with rescued animals, of course, is that animals could be tame, but you also have animals that, and we had that with Siamang, for example, it's tame, but it's also stressed by human attention. It was a depends on the individual, but so this needs to be critically assessed. Zoonosis-free, better or equal welfare standards. Once again, we need to make sure that the welfare is preserved, so it either gets the same, better at where it's going, and minimum standard facilities, just to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes. So this one is quite interesting because you don't know all the facilities at the zoos, which means actually that you're obligated to go to zoos to check out how they're taking care of the animals and what kind of facilities they have. So this is also included in my work, going to these facilities, going to zoos, and also starting the conversation, looking at the facilities and etc. And once again, no other recommendations. Here, 5 out of 5 needs to advise translocation to zoo. Euthanasia, or something which is, again, I think in all countries a bit differently. In Indonesia, it's not seen as a management option, but it will be used when there are zoonosis risks. However, when animal welfare cannot be safeguarded in captivity, is one of the variables that you need to include. If you cannot preserve it, you need to start making maybe difficult decisions. And when there's a zoonosis risk, so the bird on the slide has parrot feather disease. So this is sadly a very common problem nowadays in Indonesia. A lot of parrots have this issue. So I would say most of the confiscations that we have now have these kind of diseases in it. This is one example. In Indonesia, you are now allowed to euthanize the animal when they are tested positive for it, which is quite impressive. And that this is possible because the risk for the population in your facility, but also outside, is big. However, it's an ongoing discussion, which is a topic for another time. But zoonosis risk is one of them. And here the score is when it's above 0. So when you have one for animal welfare cannot be safeguarded and there's no possibility to improve it, euthanasia is advised. So this one is actually the one that causes the main discussions, but I believe looking at it with keeper, with the management team, with the vets, you sit together, you talk about this, and then you come to the best decisions together, because these decisions should be made rightly. And then the communication to the stakeholders. Here we go with a big table. So this is the summarized version. So this is what can be sent on a monthly basis to everyone that wants to know. So in this case, the government. So that means that you have actually a recommendation for each individual at your facility. But the government knows, okay, so they have already a slider for a zoo. The zoo is asking for turtles. You know what? This facility has this turtle, so we could recommend it. But what's also important when you talk about releases, for example, we're talking about the Javan leopard cat. When we do an application for release, we add the full decision-making line in there, and we can comment or make notes on each score to actually explain why what is decided. The same is for the Javan hawk eagle. This is for the Javan hawk eagle with the dislocated wing shoulder. So translocation to a conservation program is recommended. At the moment, sanctuary is the only possibility. So this is how we communicated all to everyone. This whole tool was also shared with the government in Indonesia. They were very happy to see how we were trying to make the decision making a bit organized in a way that everybody could understand. Of course, they have different opinions, and you have, of course, the big thing, which is different knowledge and awareness points, which I'm getting now to. But most important is the network. So you cannot have a proper disposal or without a network. So you as one institution, you cannot achieve what you want, what you need to do alone. And I think that's something that comes back all the time today. There are so many species, and there's no way you can know it all. So once again, depending on the network. Awareness and knowledge. So this tool was also shared with institutions, with people, with students, just to actually open the mind, as in with the government. Before we make a decision, we need to make certain things clear. We need to make sure that this is happening and this is happening, and there are no other options possible. So once again, this is starting to open up discussion, sharing the difficulties and the challenges when working with animals and talking about release. Once again, difficult decisions, they will always, if it starts to be, if you have animals that you want to release, but you see in their medical review or behavioral review, it's not possible. It's always a difficult decision to say it needs to be sanctuary. This is not why you're working in this field, but with having this tool behind you, you actually can communicate easier to everyone why this decision was made. So it's actually giving you a hold to share your decision. Okay, well, that was that. Thank you very much. And once again, if you're interested, I'm more than happy to share the Excel file, but I didn't want to put it on screen right today because it's a bit much. So I hope that the presentation today had a bit of information to know how it works. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Inga. That was, it's challenging. You raised some challenging and uncomfortable things for some people, such as considering euthanasia or moving animals to a zoo. It's a challenge, and we are at the forefront of conservation and welfare, and these are resource limited environments. So unless Jeff Bezos is watching today and doesn't want to go to the moon anymore and give us a lot of money, we need to have these tools and decision making, the ability to make decisions clearly of where to put our resources. Sorry, I've just lost my screen for a second. Inga, we do have some questions for you if you're still there.
Yes.
Firstly, if transferring an animal for permanent placement at another facility, such as a zoo or another rescue center, do you enter into some sort of agreement about the animal's future, such as specific minimum standards, and what happens if the facility changes hands or closing, or where that animal may move to, or they make a decision to move to in the future?
Yeah, very good question. And when we're talking about zoos, I can say that we have quite zoos that we work together with, where we translated animals to. We have a very personal contact. So we visit them, we can go to them unannounced, even if we want to, but we now have such a relationship that we trust them. But this is one of the things that when we start talking with zoos, can we visit you? Can we be informed about what's happening with the animal, etc.? So this creates some kind of trust, basically. What happens when something closes? Well, this is also, it didn't happen yet. So not sure, but for me, most importantly is making sure you have a good relationship with all the institutions that you're working together with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's important to note for a lot of sanctuaries and rescue centers, and why this tool is so important, is often you don't get to make that choice yourself. You don't have ownership of those animals. Those animals may belong to the state. They may own to the government. So this tool is particularly important that you can try and get the best outcomes for those animals when you don't have much control yourself. We did have some technical issues, obviously, before, and some people missed the information about the tool. They wanted to know who developed it, and is it freely accessible?
Well, yeah, I made it just because during the daily work, I noticed that making the decisions for each individual is challenging, and I needed something to work with that I can actually check myself and communicate with others why decisions are made. So this Excel file, it's basically just an Excel file. There is an online version made by a student once, but this is not fully functioning, but that's an idea for later if possible. I'm more than happy to share it, although I think with that moment, it's nice to have a call that I can actually explain a bit more about the exact Excel file, because this is just basically thought process. But I'm happy to share for sure.
Awesome, thank you. I was just thinking then to myself, this may be a good future workshop opportunity for anyone who's interested. We could host another event in the future where you run through it live online in with an animal, so that people can see how it really works. Should the scoring variables for release of site take into account local perceptions of releasing animals in the area? Sometimes there can be negative perceptions about releasing animals and the consequences of the presence these animals may have on local livelihoods.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Like, we also have crocodiles, and not everybody's happy to receive those. So basically, we score it as a release site when all these boxes are ticked. We cannot pick a release site box without knowing that we can actually we can do the education, that we're not sure that everybody's on board. We're talking about the management of the area, but also, of course, the local communities need to be on board with the plan. So before you take off, yes, we have a release site. This needs to be made sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Inga. I know we had a few challenges there with the technical aspects of things, and I might ask you after if we can re-record this just so we can make it really clear for everyone. But this is the challenge of holding events on Zoom. However, it's one of the key things that AFA does, is make events really accessible. Whilst we want to get to conferences and see these things and meet in person, it's often quite challenging, especially for small sanctuaries and rescue centers, to have the funds free to go and learn about these things. So whilst there's challenges here, we're very adamant we want to keep trying and do these things, and we'll come around with solutions such as re-recording these if they don't work. Okay, we're going to move on to our final speaker now. Anna, if you're ready, let me just get your bio up. So our final speaker today is Dr. Anna Nakaris, Professor of Primate Conservation at Oxford Brookes University, where she's the lead of the internationally renowned Primate Conservation Postgraduate Program. As part of 30 years of research in South and Southeast Asia, she directs the Little Fireface project. The main base of this project is Java, Indonesia, where the team there has conducted the longest ever continuous study of a single population of nocturnal prosimian in the wild, in large part to help aid their captive care and translocation, including training forestry and wildlife staff across Asia in appropriate care and in understanding their increasingly complex taxonomy. She has also led extensive campaigns regarding the exploitation of animals on social media. In her presentation today, Dr. Nakaris will consider how translocations that do not or cannot follow the IUCN guidelines are an impediment to animal conservation and can impact individual animals' welfare. Using slow lorises as a case study, Dr. Nakaris will open up discussion on how to address this sensitive issue. It's wonderful to have you here, Anna, and please share your screen whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Please let me know that it works all right.
I can hear you clearly.
Okay. And let's see if this will work. Present. And then it needs to go like this. I've not used a Prezi on a Zoom before, so I'm hoping that will be all right. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's been really interesting to listen to the previous researchers as well, and I'll be reiterating some of the things that they've said. I would just like to acknowledge that the talk I'm giving today also has the support of a number of co-authors, including a number of researchers working on slow lorises in other range countries, including India, Bangladesh, China, and of course, Indonesia. And I think some of the things I'm going to say today might be a little bit controversial, but I hope it will open up your mind to think about the way you might do translocations in the future. So this is the Javan slow loris. It's a critically endangered primate for a number of years. It's been listed as one of the world's 25 most endangered primates. It's not because there are so few of them, but it's because there are few, but their threats are continuous and ongoing. And they represent actually the same situation as many small animals throughout the tropics face. They're small, they are nocturnal. Nocturnal species often look similar to each other. We often don't know much about their ecology. We maybe never have kept them in captivity, even in zoos, yet they're traded heavily. And what do we do with these animals when they're traded? With the slow lorises, when I started working in Southeast Asia, which is about 22 years ago now, I was working with slender lorises in South Asia before that. And my colleagues in Southeast Asia kept saying, you have to come work with the slow lorises. We get a macaque in a rescue center. In 7 days, it's fine. In 7 days, a slow loris is dead. We don't know what's going on with these guys, and they're really difficult to care for in captivity. We saw that now recently with pangolins as well, the steps that have been undertaken to keep pangolins alive to be able to reintroduce them. And so I started this project working on Javan slow lorises in West Java, Indonesia, partially because we knew nothing about their behavior in the wild. We didn't know their home range size. We didn't know their social organization. We didn't know what they ate. And so this is the first fundamental when you're reintroducing animals to the wild by the IUCN, you should know something about the behavior and ecology of the animal you're reintroducing. And so now we've been doing that for 12 years in West Java, making it a really interesting case to look at animals we've translocated ourselves and naturally dispersing animals as well, which I'll be talking about today. I should have started my timer. There we go. So what can we say about primates in rescue centers? This is now a decade-old study, but it was a really interesting study looking at 70 facilities that were keeping primates and housed over 6,000 individuals of over 64 species. What was interesting is in these rescue centers, many of those animals are endangered or critically endangered. They represent about 1/3 of the world's captive population, and many of them are not even kept by any Western zoo. So the rescue centers are the only place that some of these animals are kept. This is actually the case for the Javan slow loris. There's occasionally been one confiscated from trade in Singapore or Japan, but there's absolutely no captive breeding program for them. Why are there so many slow lorises in rescue centers? I just go through this very quickly, but they are heavily traded. They are one of the most common animals used in traditional medicines. They have over 100 uses in surveys we did in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. They are venomous primates. So actually, you should think this would make them less traded, but it's a problem because in order to keep them from biting their potential owners as pets, their teeth are removed, which makes it impossible to translocate them. And the pet trade is a major threat, especially where I'm working in Indonesia now. But you'll see also there are these other threats as well. So that we have the local pet trade within Indonesia. We have the international pet trade where animals are shipped to other countries, including Japan, Russia, other parts of Eastern Europe, the Middle East. They're very popular pets. They also are popular as photo props on beaches where tourists can take photographs with them. And this trade is even extended now into Europe, where you could take photographs on beaches in Turkey, for example. And they're very easy to transport because they communicate in pure ultrasound. They curl up in a ball. They're very quiet. They're hard to detect. And so they're kind of an ideal animal to smuggle. And this has led to their popularity, for example, on social media, where many more people may have seen or experienced a loris as an illegally smuggled pet than having seen one in a zoo where they're very rare or having seen one in the wild. And this has led to what we call a process of decontextualization, where it's actually normal to see an animal like this in a really unnatural setting as a pet rather than as a wild animal. And in fact, even when I'm working with popular magazines, etc., that want photographs of lorises, they always want them in the daylight and not at night, because people like to see animals in daylight rather than nighttime. So it's an interesting case of an animal that's heavily, heavily traded, that's been appearing in rescue centers in every range country where it occurs. But there are threats I haven't even mentioned yet. So, but that's why they occur in the rescue centers. If we look at what's going on from maybe a popular opinion, or there's sometimes a conflict between conservationists and rescue center workers. And some argue that if you have an animal in a rescue center, you're looking at the welfare of the individual and you may not be thinking about the species as a whole. There could be a triage approach where any animal is taken in, even if it can't be released. In the case of the lorises, maybe they don't have teeth. What's going to happen? This may be based on personal judgments or emotion. And rescue centers can be criticized, as many of you might know, because their findings may be little published, or also if animals do die when they're translocated, for example, they don't want to admit that because they might be losing their funding or they might be criticized. And also, if we do these translocations that are emotional, where they're hard releases, it can be detrimental to remaining wild populations. And I'm going to give a lot of examples of that today, especially for these small nocturnal animals that likely contain many, many species. If we look at conservation, why might they be criticized, or researchers? They might be more concerned with the preservation of a species, not the individual. So there might be a criticism that individuals are dying, and this is happening at a very high rate. Well, actions are going on to help the species. Because some of these species are very rare or they're near extinct in the wild, what translocation should really be doing is restocking or reinforcing populations, not just being reintroduced for the sake of welfare or to empty cages for more animals. But what we see is a lot of these translocations that are done really well are often placed on what are called the important species, the charismatic species. Those are the ones that receive the funding. And in fact, in my few decades career now working in Asia, I have been told things like, we only keep cages for the important species. If we get a loris, we release it as quickly as possible because we don't want to waste money on that type of species. And also, interestingly, the fact that we are naming a number of new species of loris, it's considered, we don't want to even believe there are different species. We'd rather just release them. And we want to release them before you name it as a new species so we could get it out of our rescue center. Also, I would say conservationists and researchers are often criticized because there's a suggestion that they're focused on publishing results. But do they disseminate that into policy? Do they give the data back to rescue centers, to the government? And do the data they collect actually help? And finally, what conservationists might say is that reintroductions are costly and low success. And when we look at the IUCN Translocation Specialist Group, they have a great set of free publications called Back to the Wild, where people can rank their own translocation success. And in general, many are partly successful or very low success. And we do expect a very high death rate in translocations. But if we actually put those efforts into saving animals in the wild, studying them in the wild, maybe this would be a better use of money. But we do know that translocations are very popular with the public. And I will show you some examples of that in a moment as well. So today I'm going to be looking at slow loris translocations and perceptions of their success. I want to look at some scientific data and evidence for success. And I want to look at the concept of translocations as a threat, potentially, that controversial concept to slow lorises, but also other small nocturnal lookalike species, and explain why that might be the case. So if we look at some of these small and non-charismatic animals, we could think of a lot of reptiles, we could think of little brown birds, we could think of owls, we could think of civets. Many of these species don't use vision to tell each other apart. So once we look into their genetics, or we look into their vocalizations, or we look into other species mate recognition systems, we're revealing many new species all the time. And so a lot of those animals also are small, easy to handle, and they're probably not the type of animal that a lot of conservation organizations or welfare organizations focus on, because they're not so charismatic and there's little funding available for them. Because you can hold these animals in your hand, you can hard release them very easily. You might be able to take them immediately from a cage and put them somewhere in a forest. They are often released into areas with conspecifics. So when we're doing releases, we should have either a very low population density or no remaining animals in that area. They're then forced to disperse, and they may go into inappropriate areas, or they may die during dispersal. They're very often not given health checks because they're so little known. Their health parameters are unknown. And frequently as well, in hard releases, one of the IUCN guidelines of looking at the health of the wild population is also not followed. And so we can have a zoonotic disease transmission. Also, for a lot of these species, they've never been studied in the wild, so their habitat suitability isn't known. If you go to our website, we actually have a slow loris reintroduction and translocation guidelines. And here you can see this, we take this directly from the IUCN translocation guidelines. The first is to identify which species it is, to look at detailed studies of the wild animal's distribution and ecology, including its home range, social behavior, what predators it has, anything, what it eats before release, doing a population habitat viability analysis, understanding if these guys should be released, knowing the historic range of the species, knowing its habitat into a suitable site with protection, and not releasing just because there's not enough space for them in the wild. And I've already mentioned the health checks. And so you can imagine the huge number of species that are cute, small, kept as pets, used in medicines, that have never been studied in the wild, that are being released all the time, violating all of these recommendations. And I'm going to go on to some examples of how that's happening with lorises. Translocations have a feel-good factor. Here you see some press releases of an animal returned to the forest, both in the daylight, I should point out, looking really happy. And you could see the comments, "I'm praying these lorises will thrive and be safe. Fantastic news, keep up the good work. This has made my day, I'm so happy, back where they belong." But if we don't know the ecology of these animals, which we don't for most species of slow loris, we now do for Javan slow lorises, this shouldn't be done at all. If they're going to go back to the wild and not have any food to eat, if they're going to affect the ecology of other animals or other species, if they are not going to settle in the habitat and keep moving and running till they're exhausted, this initial picture of the animal being released as the feel-good factor isn't the truth of what's happening. And the public love this image. We've done a lot of studies on social media. These type of photos get more likes than any wild animal, even that animal a year later. If you follow it for a year and say, it's happy, it's just had its first baby, maybe the baby will get a like, but it's this animal in the cage going back to the forest that people want to see and want to fund. So what I'm first going to show you is taking 558 individuals that have been translocated from 170 news reports that me and my co-authors collected from just online news agencies and from social media. I'm also going to look at 2 case studies comparing a bit, 11 translocated Javan slow lorises from a rescue center, and comparing that with 11 translocated, natally dispersing and stable wild individuals that we study in West Java, Indonesia, and give you a little bit of information about one of those individuals as well. Those data are all collected with radio tracking. And so the one translocation study went on for about 1.5 years, and we've been radio tracking lorises in West Java since 2012, and the data presented here go till 2019, but that study's ongoing. So if we look first at these newspaper articles and how they relate to those IUCN guidelines I mentioned, first we can see that we have cases in all the countries we looked at. 58 cases in Indonesia of 464 individuals. In China, we had 15 cases of 43 individuals. In Bangladesh, 25 cases of 30 individuals. And in India, 19 cases of 21 individuals. This is showing you that in China and Indonesia in particular, animals are being reintroduced as big groups. We also counted the number of people in the photographs of these animals being released. And we know already from our wild studies with slow lorises that we should always have a team of 2 or maximum 3, possibly 4 individuals. If we have 4 individuals, we have very strict procedures of how they should be following the animals because they get very, very stressed. But we had an average of 3.4 people in the photos with a maximum of 231 people appearing at a translocation. And these are more or less hard releases where the animals being released from a cage, as you see there, from in the daylight with a lot of people around. I will show you there were some in the night as well. There's an example in the night. So here we have the site should be within the historic range of the species, and few remnant wild individuals should remain. For reintroduction, there should be no remnant population to prevent disease spread, social disruption, and introduction of alien genes. What we found when we looked at the photos, 98 of these species, individuals weren't identified to species, or we could see that they were incorrect. And of the studies, only 7 species were reported, even though there were 10 species being translocated. So 3 of them were ignored altogether and not recognized as species. So that's something that's a big problem. We actually know that slow lorises have been released on to islands where they never existed. We know pygmy lorises in very large numbers have been released into Thailand, where they're not native. We know that northern and southern Sumatran lorises, which just a few weeks ago, for years, we've had morphological evidence that they were distinct species. We published a genetic study that shows they're a few million years distinct from each other, and they are being released into each other's habitats. So it's a big problem from invasive species. And we're going to see this with a lot of nocturnal animals again that look alike. Detailed studies of the biology of the species' critical needs, habitat preferences, interspecific variation, etc. If we look, 35 cases of these newspaper reports, there was no wild study ever conducted. So the habitat and the behaviors could only be inferred from other species, but we do know there are differences in how these animals behave. If we look at the post-release monitoring, none of the releases in the news articles reported post-release monitoring. There were no published studies available for any of them. And if we look as well, 70 of 116 of them were released in the daytime. And here's a study that was published where this is not from the newspaper articles, but this is an interesting case in India where animals were rescued from forest edges, from roadside plantations and home gardens. And they used the word houses, these were probably pets, and then put into a sanctuary. Well, actually, lorises really love forest edges. They love plantations, they love home gardens, and they often don't occur in the middle of forest. So those animals will run back from the forest and go back to these places. So we have these translocations from known habitats where the animals live, putting them to places where they don't live. We have, here's an example of being released in the day with lots of photographs being taken. And this is a really attractive species, attractive type of animal. Albinos and pet trade are really, really popular. So advertising the location of an animal like this could mean it might be captured again. And also looking at the number of individuals released, 15 individuals in a single place. I'll show you why introducing 15 or 29 individuals into one place at one time can be a problem. Here we have, they shouldn't be carried out just because captive stock exists. And here we have animals wandering into local areas, 69 of them were moved to a forest with resident populations. And so we're going to have a lot of territoriality problems. I'm going on quickly because I know this talk was originally a little bit longer and I'm trying to make it shorter. So what happens when we actually look at our translocations of these individuals that are living in the wild that we've been studying for long term, their offspring who are going to be naturally dispersing, and animals that we were able to rescue locally that we translocated into a known area. So these are animals we knew came from the local area, and we monitored those as well. Well, one thing I just want to mention about slow lorises is they're extremely territorial. So of all species where you're going to be releasing an animal into an area where there are many resident species, this could be a big problem. These are their home ranges. They live in family groups. Their home ranges have minimum overlap with neighbors. They're around 6 to 10 hectares where we're studying them. Where I worked with them in Cambodia, the home ranges were 30 hectares. And people perceive of this little slow loris as slow, often saying they live in one tree, and or they move 10 or 20 meters a night. In fact, they move a few kilometers a night, potentially, and they're moving over this very large area, so of which they're very territorial over. If we look at what the result of that territorial behavior is in males and females, they're a venomous primate, and they use their venom to fight with each other. And in the wild, this is a female, 2 different females with wounds from venomous bites. These are males with wounds from venomous bites. We find that these wounds are most common when they are dispersing. So the box you see there is the average age of dispersal for a loris, which is about 3 years. And sometimes they disperse a bit earlier, sometimes a bit later. But that dispersal age is really important, and we get all these wounds that you see here. And that red and blue plot just shows you it's essentially a figure to show how territorial they are, and it indicates they're extremely, extremely territorial. So if you have bites like these with venom and you release 15 or 29 individuals in one place at one time, it's not going to be a nice situation. If we look at their diet, they have a really specialized diet. And this has been something that's been difficult for us with zoos and rescue centers for a long time. Everywhere lorises have been studied, their main diet is gum and exudates from trees, followed by nectar. Frequently, this is not even available in a country where rescue centers exist. It's very difficult to buy in gum. And thus they're given other foods like fruits, which they almost don't touch at all in the wild. So they do eat some fruits, and we're working in an area that is full of fruit gardens, yet they still have limited intake of fruit. Again, they do eat some fruit, but it's nothing compared to gum, nectar, and insects, which are the most common items in their diet. And so what we find, here's the example of the study we did of translocations in another part of West Java. You could see nectar was a very high component of the diet. But later, when we did some habitat surveys in that area, there were virtually no exudates available. And more than 60% of the animals in that study did die. And some of them died from starving to death. So it's important that we know the diet of the animal and that food is available in the place where we translocate them. And what's interesting is a lot of gum trees are really important for nitrogen fixation of the soil. So they often occur around plantations. And that's why we frequently see lorises around plantations where those type of trees are available. If we look at, this is going to be a little bit difficult to look at, but if we look at the survival of the animals that we followed, those that were dispersing naturally and those that were dispersing because we translocated them, we were actually able to look at several factors, including how habituated they were to humans, looking at aspects of their health, looking at if they had parasites, looking if their teeth were abnormal, and if they did any strange behaviors like being too vigilant towards us, sleeping at odd times, moving to the ground. And so we found actually the higher this index was, the more likely they were going to not survive. And it's been a really great way for us to be able to predict if animals are going to survive or not. And in fact, those that were more habituated, that had been in captivity for longer, that had abnormalities of their teeth, for example, they were the ones more likely to die. And we had death in both the translocated ones and the naturally dispersing ones, because some of the naturally dispersing ones just weren't really healthy animals. So, but we did have more deaths in the translocated ones. So here we see the probability of wounds is much higher in translocated animals. Stable animals have the least wounds, followed by the dispersing wounds. So these translocated animals are fighting more. And if we look at the home range size as well, the translocated animals don't know where they're going, really. The dispersing animals are looking around, they're trying to find their home range, and they eventually settle. These images look like this. Here you see animals that are, this is two different translocated animals. The one that on my left, looking at my screen, it shows you lots of kernels where that animal was like, am I home here? Am I home here? And she couldn't find a place to settle. And she eventually died. She was gouging so much because she'd been in captivity for a while that she dislocated her jaw from over gouging. Whereas the female on the right, not only did she settle relatively quickly, she was translocated from a really busy village where she was found on a roof. She's subsequently had several offspring. So we followed her for years now, and she's a really a good example of a successful translocation. And if we look here, this is naturally dispersing individuals. The one on the left, he never could settle, and he showed really bad health. He showed very bad fur condition. He was constantly on the move, and he eventually died. Whereas the female on the right, you could see she left her natal home range, quickly settled, and we're still following that individual. So it's important to know these things, actually, to be able to also interpret what your animals are doing when you translocate them. So is there hope for these for the loris in particular? They do have an extreme diet. They have really interesting social behavior with this high territoriality, with use of venom. They do live in family groups. It's hard to convince people they're not solitary. They communicate in pure ultrasound, so people don't realize that they're actually calling to each other. And also, one thing I didn't mention, we know they use a cognitive map of their area. So they use the same routes every night, and they have a really interesting route-based system. And therefore, they need to know the area where they're being released. So this post-release dispersal, where they move very, very far and can exhaust themselves, is something we see in lots of animals. And that's why hard releases may not be the answer. But for these small, again, cheap, easy to handle, cute little species, brown species, it's quite easy to just put them out into the wild, which is, in the case for the loris, is the worst thing you could do. And what does it mean for primates? Here we can see these primates in these different facilities where many of them their behavior wasn't known in the wild, but 37% of these animals were deemed as suitable for release, mainly in Asia. And many of them, because the government likes these reintroductions, and many rescue centers are actually pressured by their local government to release animals, to release them in the case of nocturnal animals in the day for photo opportunities. And we as the scientists or the rescuers may not have a choice in that. So we may be contributing to the problem, because if we don't do it and go along with the government, they won't allow us to keep our rescue centers. So that's a question for the discussion later, is how do we deal with having to release an animal that's not known in the wild, whose species isn't known, when the government is telling us we have to do it and they're standing there watching you. This is just a table about implications of improper release. That's from a paper we wrote about 10 years ago, but it still goes on. And it's so we have to think not only of the welfare of the individual, we have to think of the welfare of the existing fauna and flora. And knowing that releasing an individual or many individuals at once could cause far more problems than keeping them in captivity. So I would just like to thank all the funders who supported my project over the last 12 years in Indonesia. And I would like to direct you to our website. We're also on social media. We do have translocation guidelines for slow lorises. Right now, they're available in English and Indonesian. But having listened to the talks today, I would really love to get them translated to other languages as well. So I think I will stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very, very much for that, Anna. That has given us lots of food for thought. The most important thing that people are asking about is all your cats in the background.
Oh, are they?
They seem to be going on little adventures everywhere. So I had a few comments about that. But you also raised the important, so many important issues. I mean, I've read into Loris's and some of your work, like you said, speaking in ultrasonic communication, terrestrial. I think I read somewhere that also you've discovered they're monogamous, and there's been couples that
Yeah.
did that for like a decade, which is absolutely incredible. And it just demonstrates how important and fundamental research is to understanding so many different critters around the world. So one of our first questions, and it's a bit of my questions and a few other people's all merged together, and you raised it just before you finished. So when I worked in Indonesia and Laos, it is common that government agents want photos with animals at the point of release or rescue. Along similar lines, either they want the media attention or there's a lack of capacity at rescue centers. They're very quick to just push animals out with no rehabilitation or local environmental assessments. And these are issues that have been brought up by many of our members in our interviews that we've had over the last 6 months. Do you have experience, or what strategies have you used to demonstrate that this is totally inappropriate, and how can we change government policies for better results for animals?
I would say one of the countries, well, we've had really good success in Vietnam and also in Thailand, in a sense. In Vietnam, there's been some studies of lorises for quite some time. And early on, there was the following up of the translocated animals. And then we had a long-term study of pygmy lorises. And now we have EAST, which is a rescue center in the south of Vietnam. And they've been working really closely with the government, having different government guards, becoming essentially citizen scientists, checking in the different national parks where they work, where lorises are present, where they're not present, where they were present, where they've been hunted, and where they're no longer hunted. And so they've been very good at finding release sites that are over-hunted, where the animals could go back in, where through a number of training sessions and workshops, the government staff and the forest department staff were really supportive of following up and protecting those animals after they were translocated. And it was also interesting because they had a high death rate in the beginning, but they worked out if they translocated the animals at the age of dispersal, they did a lot better. So they started translocating younger animals as the priority. So I think having a good relationship with the government, including them in all of your discussions, can over time, and that's about a 10-year process. So over time, they can come around. Where we're working in Thailand, it's with Love Wildlife, where we have over 100 lorises in a rescue center there. The Thai government is really passionate that they are not released until there have been wild studies and their genetics are sorted out, because we have a really interesting part of Thailand where one species turns into another, and we don't know what's going on in the middle, if it's a different species, if it's a hybrid. We don't know exactly where that boundary is. And so there's been a lot of work to start doing. It's been a slow process, but the government themselves, though, they are waiting for all of the data to be collected before the translocations start. And one of the things that is happening now is an area set aside for soft release, where the animals could be studied in that area before they might be hard released, where they might be released and monitored later. So again, that was a number of workshops, stakeholders, inviting national scientists, national vets, international scientists, international vets working together. From my Indonesian experience, we can work with the local government. So I think it would be very hard to change the national government at the moment in Indonesia, but if you make a good relationship with the local government, when we do get the animals, occasionally they still want the photograph of everybody walking up the mountain in the daylight with the animal, even holding the animal. And then we say we cannot release it now. We're putting it back in the cage or in its enclosure before we release it. So we allow them the photo opportunity, but the release is still done correctly. And the trouble, like any decontextualized photograph on the internet, is that we then look at my data set of around 500 photos, say that animal was released in the daytime. So maybe in an initial press release, we would say, before its nighttime release all of these people appeared to wish the loris on its way, or the animal on its way. So that's another option, but it's just how the use of those photos in the future could be troublesome and exacerbate those kind of releases. But it is a good solution because people do like those photographs. They do generate interest, they generate funding. We can't deny it. They generate likes on social media, which, I mean, is that a good thing or not? Who knows? But that's how we've been able to settle it as well, and working a lot with the local zoo in our area to give them training on care of lorises, improving the facilities, and providing them with gum, for example. So we're regularly providing that zoo with gum and trying to find wild sources where they could feed the lorises gum and growing the right kind of trees. But yeah, it's very, very complicated.
Wow.
But I would say personal relationships are really important, and don't give up if your government changes that forest staff every 6 months, which happens all over Asia. So you find that your best friends, they love your animals, they're really on board, and then they get moved somewhere else. So go straight back and start over, and don't get frustrated by that, because if that person goes somewhere else, hopefully they'll have good practice in their new place. So you're just constantly training the next person.
I think that's a really interesting point you make that is spread across all our speakers, is the development of relationships at a local or ground level. That's where results happen. Changing national policy overnight is fairly impossible. Another tricky question we've got is, given that SARCs are overflowing with animals and government pressures to take animals in and limited resources, agents forcing releases to happen, is there a middle ground to releasing wildlife, or a bare minimum set of tasks that should be met to give the animals the best chance? Or is it a complete no, essentially?
That's why I say, is it a threat or not? Because if we know that, many of these, we could take Australia, for example, or North America, where we have really, really well-funded releases that every single animal is monitored. And we see that there's often a 10 or 20% survival rate in those releases. And that's with all the money, all the resources. So we actually know that when we do monitor, we don't have an amazing survival rate. So that's difficult point number one. So is it better to preserve that already existing wild population? Why put more pressure on them? They already have very limited habitat. I think getting creative with releases is one example, working with eco hotels, eco lodges, golf courses, where some of these, not leopards, of course, but a lot of our small species, different birds, civets, etc., they could thrive in those places. And so I think a lot of private land is a good option for potential releases that's underutilized at the moment. We're working with a really big energy company at the moment that has private land. We're working with some plantations that have private land, and those owners, at least for their lifetime, are going to potentially be passionate about animal conservation in that area. And hopefully by the time they've had that land, the population will be established. So private land is one option where, instead of, I think the worst is national parks as dumping grounds. And fighting against that it's the one place where we're going to have good wild populations, and to keep putting pressure on them by putting animals into those places. Or we have cases in Indonesia where we have these small islands that animals that aren't native to those islands are released onto those islands. We really, that's, I think, is wholly inappropriate, and we shouldn't be releasing animals outside their native range. And we just have to, in that case, I mean, I don't want to kill any animal. I'm vegan, but euthanasia sometimes is better. I say, if I was put naked into a rainforest and left to starve to death, I would rather be euthanized first, in a sense, because it may feel like we're doing something good for the animal, but if it's terrified, not in the right habitat, it's going to be really cold, really hot, have no food. That's a really terrible way to go. I don't think it's really giving it a chance. So again, if we don't know about the species, also just getting to know about the species, even in the rescue center, I know all the time being limited, but trying to find out something about these species we know nothing about, like recording it, sharing it somehow.
Yeah, that's another point that's been raised to us quite a lot, is the lack of research that may be out there, because it can be quite difficult to publish studies where you're your N number or your sample is relatively small. So finding other ways in which we can share and disseminate information on when release of 1 or 2 individuals may have been successful with some ongoing study is also something we need to, it's something we need to talk about and find out how we can better share that. One last question we have for you before we take a bit of a break is, what would you say are the main challenges in understanding the ecology of most loris species? Is it lack of capacity, funding, or difficulty studying these species because of their nocturnal lifestyle?
I would say it's lack of species champions. So you need someone who's really passionate about that species in each country where it occurs to actually undertake a long-term study. A lot of young people these days, they want to spend 1 year on something and then move on to something else, or 6 months or 3 months. So the younger people are the shorter time. They're like, and now I'm going to go work on this project, or now I'm going to go work on this species. But for an animal with a long life, any of the primates, any of the carnivores, you need a 5 or 10 or 20 year study to really understand their behavior. And to commit that is something that a lot of people find difficult. And having people who are willing to be the champion of that species and dedicate that time is difficult. And also, I would just say, anyone who's listening, you can be a world expert in so many species, but everyone goes for the same ones. You know, I'm going to work on orangutans, I'm going to work on chimpanzees, I'm going to work on elephants. And just pick a hyrax instead of an elephant, pick a langur instead of an orangutan. You know, there's so much to learn. And having run a master's course in primate conservation with 450 students over 20 years, it's still 70% apes and macaques people want to study. So and there's 630 or so species of primates, you know, so that's primates, which are really charismatic, and still people want to study the same few species. So just being more open as researchers and loving more animals is really important.
And I think you're an ode to picking something that's a little bit unusual and making an amazing career out of it, and learning so much and contributing to the conservation of these species. Thank you very much for your talk and presentation today. We're going to take another quick 10-minute break so we can all make another cup of tea, and we'll be back at the top of the hour to start our discussion. Thanks again, everyone. Oh, what? Let's start the recording again. Hello. If everyone is ready, we'll start again. If our four speakers could turn their videos and microphones on, if they seem to get a smooth stream, we've got some questions for our panel. Give a couple more minutes for people to come. Okay, Inge, are you there? Yep,
Yes, I am. I have not
Perfect.
seen to activate my video because it was the host of it. I don't know if you can.
No, that is it's perfect. Maybe we'll leave yours off just to make sure we get the proper bandwidth, if that's okay, or a clear stream from you. So our first question come from Alejandra Recalard, excuse me for the name pronunciation, who I believe works at Free the Bears in Laos. She asked, or they asked, I should say, is it possible to raise awareness within those sanctuaries, which they're making a great effort to rescue wildlife, but at the same time encouraging unethical tourism by promoting selfies with wildlife? To provide a quick example on the side of this, I've often heard sanctuaries say that they will get far more interaction on a post, or they will get far more donations come in if they have a staff member holding or interacting with an animal, compared to when they post a picture of an animal alone. So do you think it's possible to raise good awareness, and what are some of the strategies that we could use? Inge, we might start with you.
All right. Well, I think it's actually quite interesting because what we see with Chikananga and Wanicare is that we get the most hits with very sad story / photo. It doesn't need to be a person there. So if you have, sorry to say, a rather shocking photo with the right story to it, I think you can create a lot of awareness as well. That's our experience. We don't post the photos with people.
And have you experienced the same thing in Wildlife Rescue Center Jogja?
Yeah, for some of our volunteers and also some interns may sometimes take a picture of their self with wildlife years ago, and then we kind of sort it out using making some kind of a guideline for this kind of activities. Like, for example, we have the volunteer guideline and internship guideline stating that it is not allowed to take a picture together with the wildlife, and even it's not allowed to post the picture, anything related to whatever in our center, to the public without our concern.
Yeah. And Anna, you have worked a lot with seeing social media images and people with animals online. Do you find it possible that we can deliver a different way of raising awareness in sanctuaries and rescue centers and needing to interact with wildlife?
Well, I think one of another key point is that a lot of sanctuary workers do interact with wildlife, and this concept of the context is really important. And so I was in a really huge workshop with zookeepers that do either visitor experiences with ambassador animals, or who had photographs of themselves in a veterinary context, etc. So I think if it's a clear professional veterinary context where the gloves or PPE or whatever is needed is worn, and ideally the photograph is watermarked or has a context like an @ tag on it, where someone could go to the account in a place where it can't be removed easily, I think there is a place for, we call them animal two shots, where there's a person in shot with the animal. I've worked a lot with the BBC, and they always want to put in a two shot. And they say it's also in the moment in that film, in a BBC film, the public want to see the presenter in context with an animal. We had a speaker, Ben Garrett, who does a lot of, just did a whole television, what do you call it, series about chimpanzee sanctuaries. And he argued as well that him being a professional in context with the chimpanzees has brought in a huge amount of fundraising to that sanctuary. But it's contextualized. If it was just anyone, if it was a famous Hollywood actor, it would be different. So we as professionals, if we use two shots for the help of our sanctuary in as professional a way as we can, almost going over the top with all the PPE, like this is how you handle an animal, I think that would be as educational as avoiding it altogether, because we do have to handle the animals. So but having a volunteer going up with a silly two shot, that's very different. And we have the same rules in our project as well, of not posting those kind of photographs. But I think we've gotten really extreme because there is a place and people do like those photographs more. So making them as educational as possible would be my suggestion, and providing a message about what you're doing, the health check you're doing or whatever.
And Sarah, I believe, is it correct that Wild Welfare also has an aspect of working with tourism companies to promote animal welfare? Was that right? You had a relationship with one company. Have you found do you have a policy about this, or do you have information about this for those organizations you work with in tourism about photos and interacting with animals?
So at the moment, the relationships that we have with the tourism companies, it's more speaking about animal welfare as a whole. If you are looking at particular distances between certain wildlife that you might be viewing, or making sure that the sanctuaries that you might be visiting aren't pseudo sanctuaries and that kind of thing. So that's more where we're going on that front. But we do a lot of training with the companies themselves to make sure that they can understand animal welfare as a whole better. So that is something that we could certainly bring up with them. But I think what Anna was saying was really important. Obviously, they with context, they do have a use, and we find it as well with our social media and that kind of thing. People really do want to see us out there working with them, with the animals. But I think, and I've had this conversation a lot with zoos, is we do work with animals and we want to show it off. So we might, our profile picture might be us with an animal, but then you've got so many people who don't have the opportunity going, oh, well, I want that picture too. I'm going to go out and find that. And that's where we get the unethical situations. And again, it might be through naivety, it might be through other things. But if we have that show of solidarity, and so many people that I've spoken to now who do work with animals, you wouldn't actually be able to tell from their profiles, their social media presence, because they don't actually show photos of them working with animals. And it can be really difficult because you do want to show it off. You do want to be like, hey, I do this really cool thing. But if we are making the situation worse, and again, for rescue centers, that might mean that eventually more animals come into their care through, the selfie industry and that kind of thing, then it's showing that solidarity and making that wider awareness. And also, I guess, in a sense, calling people out on it as well. If we can make everybody aware of what this one photo might be doing overall. I've had several kind of arguments with friends almost, in saying, this seems like just an innocent share of a photo, but actually looking at that wider picture, it can have so many implications.
Well, that's absolutely correct in terms of, maybe those who are in the Western world and working in a professional facility like a zoo or something like that, interacting with an animal in your care. If that message goes to somewhere else in the world, the Middle East or Southeast Asia, for instance, it's actually very easy to go to a market and find one of those animals and replicate that yourself. So the way that we present ourselves in this industry and in rescue centers, etc., is very important. And I believe for anyone who's interested, Brooke might have to correct me here, but the IUCN Small Ape Specialist Group actually has guidelines for captive animal facilities in how to excuse me, I've lost for words, how to create good messages on social media about interactions with animals.
Yeah, it's the human primate interactions section, but yes.
There we go. Thank you very much, Brooke. Okay, so our next question is a bit of a broad one, and you can interpret it however you want. We have talked a lot about the challenges for sanctuaries and rescue centers, and you've touched on in your presentations, but what are the biggest obstacles in your view, maybe the top three, to SARCs being able to meet the challenges of wildlife welfare and conservation? Sarah, what do you think from your experience working in Asia?
Well, obviously, I think from what my talk was about, professional development is a massive one. I mean, I've spoken to people who, I think in Vietnam just a few years ago when I was out there, they didn't actually have a Vietnamese phrase for animal welfare. So even understanding it without even a definition of it and a word for it in Vietnamese is quite difficult. So dealing with some of those issues and bringing people up into really that compassionate, empathetic approach, but using that science and making that science accessible. So yeah, I still think that, yeah, capacity building in that sense is definitely the biggest one. But I think that everybody else has probably got even more experience in sanctuaries that might be able to offer more insight.
And Inge, from your experiences, what are the biggest challenges that you come across in your career in the last 10 years?
Yeah, a number. I would say resources for sure. And then I know we're talking about financial, but it's staff, it's everything that has to do with being able to do what you want to do. And also capacity for sure, and the support system. So what I see is people on the front lines are immensely dedicated and they give 100% every single time. And it's sometimes a bit underestimated how much that asks from a person, from a team. So I see that a lot as well, that this is something that really needs attention sometimes to support the individual, but also the center, but the individual needs attention as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think, what do they term it? Compassion fatigue often to support people, because I think everyone here in their work and many of those joining on Zoom today will have seen some pretty horrendous situations in their life. And for a bunch of very compassionate and empathetic conservationists and people concerned about animal welfare, I know personally, it's taken a huge toll sometimes seeing these things. And Anna, I guess you'd agree, considering your research, that would be a struggle for people.
And I think also the concept of animal welfare not being present in some of these places, but also when an animal dies, we can feel that, you know, the loss. So we've just done a recent study on Western zoos and management's how management don't want to provide bereavement leave when an animal that someone's been caring for a long time dies. So in addition to all of the other struggles and mental health issues, you really care for these animals and you see them dying and you're supposed to stay strong all the time. And I think that's something that's a very difficult issue for people to talk about, but also at the same time, maybe working in a culture where no one else is feeling that empathy for that animal. So then you and 2 or 3 colleagues are alone and feeling the empathy and sadness when those animals die. So I think that's also very, very important, and recognizing, you know, someone who does commit, like Inge being in Chickamauga for 10 years, that's a huge amount of commitment. And it's just as an example, because I've worked with her a lot. I know how difficult that can be. And I think a lot of they go, oh, you have this cool job, you're working, blah, blah, blah. And they don't realize what you've given up and how low the salaries are. And some people feel guilty taking a salary for this work. And I think that's something else, that conservationists deserve a salary, and more of the funders need to realize that as well, because it's one of the hardest things to fundraise for is salaries and paying people what they deserve to do this really difficult work.
And that's, yeah, absolutely true. Having been in many of those positions myself, it's a challenge being away from family, being away from friends. Often, I know in Inge's case, for many years, there was very little internet at Chickamauga. And so you tend to rely on your family, on your work colleagues, which can also be a real challenge. And Erna, what's it like in your center in terms of your staff and how they feel and mental health?
Well, yeah, that's also, yeah, I agree that mental health is really, we should acknowledge that as a top priority, I think, because we many times feel the return. I mean, the people come and go quite fast because not many of them can really put their time a lot in this kind of work if not really passionate about the animals, I think. And also I agree to Anna saying that yeah, we do a great job, but often it's just the most difficult thing to fundraise for the salary of the staff itself. So back again, it's resource is the major barrier for our work, and also the political reality as well sometimes could exacerbate everything, because like we all know that we have done many things we can for the animals, but sometimes we need to, you know, I don't know, maybe the authority could have more work, or they have some kind of system to reporting that the information, the relay of information cannot be done really quickly. But yeah, in the fact that we need to make a quick decision in the field a lot, many times, and accepting that kind of a response for from the authority, it's quite devastating. And that's where we need a support from many of our colleagues at the time. And yeah, for me, it's quite rewarding to work in this place, because we have like a comfort place for everybody to work with such a passion.
Yeah, you're right. And I think you raised a very interesting point again there, is that whilst we are all passionate conservationists, empathetic towards animal welfare, maybe stakeholders in particular have a different, say such as governments, have a different perception of it, and it can be really difficult to navigate that situation when you are so intensely passionate and got that fire in you about that. I'm really happy that that was actually raised today as one of the biggest challenges in SARCs is mental health and compassion fatigue, because it is something I've personally seen repeated many times. And it's great to hear that there is the want to support each other here. And hopefully that's something we're going to develop, not necessarily on the mental health side of things, but to create a forum. For instance, we want to create a subgroup where people across Indonesia can actually talk to each other, and whether that be issues about the struggles that you're having personally, or it can be also about what's happening in your region. A few of you alluded to, there's many regional differences across Indonesia to how people work with the authorities and what the authorities do. So that's something that we're hoping to develop, and many of you will actually hear about next month as we plan that. Yeah, hopefully. Let's see how it goes. I just want to create an open forum where anything can be brought up just to update each other. I think that particularly in Indonesia, everyone knows each other, and it's understandable across rescue centers everywhere, as everyone knows their network, everyone knows everyone by name. But to actually be able to sit down and chat and actually get an update from people rather than just in passing when you're picking up an animal or you happen to be at a conference. So hopefully we can provide that forum as usual for animals for everyone to connect. On to our next question is, how often in your Sanctuary Rescue Center, we asked this to Amana before, how often in your Sanctuary Rescue Center do you feel you need to make compromises to your activities due to lack of resources that may impact conservation and welfare? And how do you make those hard choices? What are some of the things that cannot be compromised on? And what are some of the things that you have compromised on? Is there a middle ground or a minimum benchmark with requirements and things that you do not compromise on? Sorry, I should select someone first, shouldn't I? Anna, you can take that one on first.
Well, yeah, I have raised that before, that we have, because of the resource constraints, financial constraints and anything, we need to compromise with many things, of course, including providing facility for animals, because we never know. It is quite unpredictable on what numbers and what kind of species that may come to our side. And then we need to compromise, like, for example, if we have upper capacity already in the quarantine, for example, then we would just make something quite similar to the quarantine, like improvise more in the field without losing the substance or losing the essential of each purpose of the work. That's what we're trying to do, and that also the case where we don't have lots of space anymore for the animals. We will just try to communicate that to the government, like, really sorry, we don't have enough capacity, and this may exacerbate the condition of the animals. Would you please just send, or how can I help you to reach out other organizations willing to accept those kind of the animals? That's the least we can do, at least.
And how receptive are governments to that? I know in some experiences that if you refuse a government agency once off, that they do not want to, they just won't call you again for the next time, and they'll just release the animal or just not bother with it. Do you find you've had experiences like that?
Well, yeah, many times we are rejected to accept the animals, and then it's quite lucky that here we have quite many facilities, not rescue center, but at least facility like the breeding center, I think, and also the zoo to accommodate the animals as well. But this is also the point, and the important point is not every facility have the ability to make a decision, to make a future planning towards the animals, especially those that are still releasable. So that's also the thing that we try to keep speaking towards the government as well, that I think increasing the capacity of the government staff itself in terms of how to make a scoring system quite feasible in the field, making a decision about how and which animals that can be still released, they should be sent to the proper place to be able to be released, and then which animals that are unreleasable.
Yeah, absolutely. And Inga, I believe you would have some of the same challenges at Chickenunga. Chickenunga is a very big centre with many, many animals, and whilst the primary, you might be used as hopefully just a temporary holding facility, you end up getting animals that are essentially in sanctuary at your rescue centre, such as, orangutans that take a lot of resources. How have you in the past made compromises to the activities that you have undertaken at Chickenunga to try and essentially balance the budget and achieve as much as you can?
Yeah, I would say you compromise on a daily basis, because there are so many layers in the center where you have to do compromises. Like diet, for example, during the COVID, this was a big thing. We didn't have enough resources to buy nectar or gum for some specialized diets. So we had to say, okay, we have to accept that we do our best, but at this moment we have to do it with less than we want. For enclosures, like maintenance, you sometimes make the decision to do it less good than you want, just to make sure that it's still usable. Staff, you don't have enough staff, which means you don't have enough time per animal. There are compromises on so many levels, also on releases and intake. How do we balance it? We look at the options and we take the best route, and also trying to think ahead. Like with the diets of COVID, it was an informed decision, as in we don't know how long the situation is going to last, and we know that we have kept animals alive on a less ideal diet before. So that's where you're going to pick off what's possible, although with what you want to, but that's how you're going to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just had another comment in the chat from Felicity Oram. She said that she thinks the work to increase the capacity of government staff is critical, but quite sensitive and important work. In going on that comment, what are some of the strategies that you guys have used or seen in your time to increase the capacity or the understanding of government? Anna touched on that before, but has anyone else had experience with good strategies they've been able to implement? Inga, have you had any?
Well, what we do, like what Anna also said, like making a connection with your local forestry department, local government staff. And what we did is actually inviting them every single time when we do something and taking them along into the steps. And that's how we not only show them how we work, but also you get that personal connection and just put time into it. It can be sensitive work, but showing them the challenges you face on a daily basis and discussing these topics actually does wonders sometimes, even with the people you don't expect it.
Yeah. We have a specific question for Sarah now. How do you find the enrichment roadmap works when you may leave a facility? So you've gone in, you've explained it, everyone gets super excited about it and wants to implement it in their daily lives. But then people get very busy, they get stuck into their duties, and it doesn't often get fully implemented in a place. What have you done to ensure or that this can be something that's front of mind in everyone, in front of everyone's mind when you may have left a facility?
So the enrichment roadmap is one aspect, but what we want to do is go into the whole reasoning behind enrichment as a whole, why it's useful, how you assess it, all that kind of thing. So once that understanding is there, then we hope that the desire to continue it is also there as well. And we have seen a lot of people get in touch with us and say, oh, hey, this is this thing that we've done because of this, we've gone through the steps, that kind of thing. But I often find with the people that I work with, the passion is there, but they sometimes do need just that guidance to be able to go through it and then to really be able to understand the nuts and bolts of it. So I've worked with people in Vietnam, they get really excited about enrichment, but they're not questioning why they're doing it. They just want to do it because it's a fun activity for them as well as the animals and their activity levels. So to kind of ensure that longevity then is to help the people using that roadmap to understand the deeper meaning behind enrichment as a whole. You can also help them by putting together enrichment rotas and then using the roadmap as part of that to be able to highlight what times in the day might be good for enrichment, when you might need a rest time, when you might need to rotate, when you might need to clean your devices, all that kind of thing. So providing those opportunities and also inspiration. So when we worked in Vietnam with the help of TAN, we actually set up the Vietnamese Zookeepers Association Facebook page, and they were all sharing ideas of things that they created, and then somebody else wanted to copy that or change it up a little bit for their species and that kind of thing. So I think seeing people, and not necessarily kind of Western zoos, for example, bringing in these ideas, but actually people from your community, from within your country, implementing these ideas and sharing it within that community. And again, that removes that language barrier as well. So having all those opportunities, that can really help. But yeah, we have seen evidence of people saying, oh yeah, we've used this and it's been great, and this is what we've created from it. So it's been really nice to see that.
It's fantastic that you're getting such good feedback on the things that you're trying to implement. And the e-learning program you have is also exceptionally exciting for a lot of people. What do you have plans for other languages into the future, or do you see particular regions in the world which would benefit from that greatly?
Yeah, so as I said in the talk, Thai is scheduled for summer this year, providing that everything goes to plan. There is always something that crops up that tends to be difficult, but we usually do manage to get them out, usually about twice a year. Elliot, I know that you know that after this period when we launched Thai, we're actually hoping for a bit of a reboot. We're going to look at some of the information within the learning program, or actually take on board the difficulties within rescue centers and sanctuaries, because they're not addressed as much within certain modules. So for example, we do have a zoos in the 21st century module. We'd actually like to encompass all captive animals within that, all facilities. So we're actually going to look at rebooting some of that information. After that, we do have Hindi, and we do already have funding for Hindi in 2024. And beyond that, we are currently searching for funding for further languages. We obviously do a lot of work in Asia, so we have been prioritizing some of the languages where we do have connections and facilities that really need it, and we can share that within those facilities, which has been great. But we do also do work in Brazil, so we're looking at potential Portuguese. And then also in terms of identifying languages, we want it to obviously have the biggest impact on humans and animals as possible. So we are currently at the moment looking at the wider spoken languages, so things like French and Spanish and that kind of thing, so we can ensure that maximum impact.
Brilliant. And Nick Field from Global Animal Welfare. Hi, Nick. Thank you for coming today. She said that through her programs, they encourage environmental enrichment as part of regular routine rather than just being an add-on at the end, which is very, very important.
Absolutely.
So we talked about before, sorry, let me get my words together. Science these days, as you mentioned also, Sarah, moves at a very rapid pace. There's a lot of developments and a lot of new things coming out. So some of these things some of these concepts are very complex for frontline workers. So do we focus on trying to reinforce the basics with frontline staff, such as keepers or even researchers in Anna's case, or do we try to adapt and keep people up to date with the latest animal welfare science or research techniques? Anna, what do you think? If that question made sense.
I guess a resource like Sarah's, where she has this downloadable information. If people can find a resource like that where they can be updated in a simple, easy way, I think as a researcher myself, it's really important to make an infographic of a paper I write if it's relevant for say a welfare issue or something important. I usually try to make my paper condensed into something very digestible and simple that could be shared on social media, can be printed, can be downloaded. I've been starting to do 2 to 3 minute videos of papers that I write, so people can listen to it, or they can put on closed caption where they don't want to read a very long paper. So I think as researchers, we have an obligation when we're doing work that's relevant to frontline workers to make it short and digestible as well as the long version. And then hopefully organizations like Sarah's can get that information and make it available to a wider range of people as well.
Brilliant. We've got a nice little question now to slowly take us towards the end. For each of you, what is your favorite rescue release story or experience? Dr. Hamna, what do you think? What was your favorite rescue or release story and experience?
Well, for me, because I witnessed it on myself, is the release of an eagle. Yeah, that would be my favorite because we really have rescued eagles at our facility in the past. And then secondly would be the orangutan. I mean, we previously have 7 orangutans in our place, and we all know that almost all orangutan rehab centers is fully occupied usually. So it's like a long queue before we kind of from Java sending them to Kalimantan. And yeah, probably that's the best thing, to be able to sending the orangutans back to their island, although still long step to release. Yeah, but.
And Inga, do you have any particularly favorite or memorable release stories or rescue stories?
Well, the success release stories are always favorite for sure, 100%. The last one of the Calvin Leopard is one that's standing immensely high that we have released with the GPS tracker and is doing very well. That's amazing to know. But when you talk about rescue stories, and I think would be a sea lion that we rescued, and it was in a horrible state, and the moment it started singing again, that's something I'll never forget.
And Sarah, from your experience of going through Asia, what are some of the most memorable animals that you've happened to work with?
I'm actually going to say humans. I'm a massive animal person, obviously, but the humans I've met along the way, they are the ones that give me the most hope. As Wild Welfare, we work obviously as much with people as we do with animals. And I've met some incredible people during my time in Vietnam. Elliot, I met you, which was wonderful. And you just meet these wonderful, inspiring, dedicated people who, yeah, we sometimes do go through, as we touched on earlier, these dark patches with mental health and the things that we struggle with and we see. But ultimately, we don't get up with it. We don't give up. We are so determined. We get up every day and we go out and we do it. And some of the people that I've met, and you just think the world is such a better place, and the animals in the world are so lucky to have you, you know, being their champion. And as Anna was saying, hopefully, you know, we do have a few more champions of non-favorited species in the world. So some of the humans that I've met, they've definitely left a lasting impression on me, and even some of the best times that I've had during work, and you just look back and you look at those interactions and you think, yeah, this is someone who's taken in what we've said. So one of my favorite points from Vietnam was when I was living there, was I was having a Google Translate conversation, as you do, with one of the keepers, and he typed in, I want my animals to have choice. And I actually broke down and cried when I read that, because it was such a strong, an incredible thing for him to say, and to know that he wanted, and for him to feel that passionately. And then I knew that he would be able to go on and make that change happen. And again, long after I'd left, he was making those changes happen. So yeah, the humans that I've met, as much as I love all the animals that I meet, and they are incredible species and we're so lucky to work with them, is the humans that keep me going. And I never thought, especially when I was younger, I never thought I'd say that, but it is very true.
And I think that's exceptionally touching. I think that's probably very touching for many of the people here on this call today who work with animals very closely. And finally, Anna, do you have any wonderful release stories of success or rescues that are particularly memorable for you?
I try to go through a good and a bad one very quickly, because we have a lot of, going back to humans, a lot of people who come to work with animals, they don't want to do what we call socialisasi in Indonesia, where you go into the area, the village, and you say, this is why lorises should be here, the animals should be here. And so we found a perfect release site for the lorises. And the team at the time were really reluctant. They didn't want to waste their time on the people. They released the loris there. And the reason there weren't lorises there is they were really heavily hunted. And the loris was hunted within 48 hours, she was gone. And so it actually made me be able to say to my team, look how important it is that we work with the community, that that site could be amazing if we get the community on our side. And then the real success is our lady Zina, who was in my talk, who's now on her 3rd or 4th baby. So they only give birth to 1 baby a year. And so actually seeing her survive, get married to a really special guy, and then have these 3 babies, it's been amazing. So she's a real success story.
Oh, that's brilliant to finish off on. Does any of our participants on Zoom or YouTube have any final questions or comments for our speakers today? Couple minutes to type anything in, or you may also raise your hand and you can jump on live and ask your questions. Nope, maybe not. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there, everyone. I want to extend my huge thanks and gratitude to all our speakers today, and for also being just so open and honest about some of the challenges and struggles of working with rescued wildlife. I also really want to thank the amazing team that I work with at Asia for Animals. There's been a flurry of activity. Despite this very obvious and calm demeanor here, there is a flourish of activity happening right behind the scenes here as we process questions and make sure that things are going live on Zoom. So thank you to everyone behind the scenes. Some very final pieces of feedback of housekeeping is that I'll send a feedback form out in the next couple of days to everyone, so we can know what are the issues you think affecting sanctuaries and rescue centers the most, and also help shape and develop future events. And also one boring piece is that all the data that you submitted to us to register for this will be deleted within 14 days, so you don't have to worry about us keeping it. If any of you have any questions or comments about our event today, please do not hesitate to message me, email me at elliot@asiaforanimals.com, and go to AFA if you would like to learn, if you would like to know more about your organization, joining Asia for Animals or the Sanctuaries and Rescue Centers Coalition. So again, thank you very much for everyone joining us today, and I hope to see you at future Sanctuaries and Rescue Center Coalition events in the future. Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Keep in touch. Bye.
Absolutely.